The Sept world of Viorla stands as a testament to the martial spirit of the Tau Empire, its name literally translating to hot-blooded in the Tau lexicon. Located near the border of Tau-controlled space, Viorla experiences an extreme climate with scorching summers and freezing winters, forging a culture that prizes aggression, tactical excellence, and martial prowess. It was into this environment of disciplined militarism that Ashava was born. The Tau who would one day become Commander Farsight entered the world during what Imperial scholars would term the late 8th century of the 41st millennium. From his earliest days, the young Fire caste member displayed an uncanny aptitude for physical challenges and tactical thinking. Even among the naturally martial Fire caste, Ashava stood apart, his reflexes sharper, his mind quicker to analyze battlefield conditions, and his body more resilient to the harsh training regimens imposed on young Tau warriors. The Fire caste training on Viorla is notoriously demanding, designed to weed out all but the most capable warriors. Young Tau undergo grueling physical conditioning, weapons training, and tactical simulations that push them to their limits. The harsh climate of Viorla serves as both backdrop and training tool, with cadets often forced to endure extended exercises in both the blistering heat of summer and the bone-chilling cold of winter. This builds not only physical resilience but mental fortitude, qualities that Ashava possessed in abundance. During these formative years, Ashava's instructors noted his exceptional ability to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. Where other cadets would falter when faced with unexpected scenarios, Ashava thrived, quickly recalibrating his approach and leading his training cadre to victory. This adaptability would later become one of his most celebrated traits as a commander, though in his youth, it sometimes manifested as an unwelcome tendency to question established doctrine. The young warrior's first taste of actual combat came during a border skirmish with Orc raiders who had penetrated the outer defense perimeter of Viorla territory. Though still a junior Fire warrior, Ashava distinguished himself by rallying a broken squad and executing a flanking maneuver that caught the Orc warband by surprise. This action not only saved several wounded comrades, but also provided valuable intelligence on Orc movement patterns to senior commanders. The incident earned Ashava accelerated promotion through the ranks of the Fire caste, moving from Shasla to Shasui faster than most of his peers. As a Shasui, he was granted command of his own small cadre, where his leadership style began to crystallize. Ashava emphasized mobility, adaptability, and aggressive action, principles that aligned perfectly with Viorla's martial culture, but sometimes pushed against the more measured approach advocated by the Ethereal caste. Ashava's tactical innovations during training exercises caught the attention of senior commanders. In one notable simulation, he deployed his forces in a manner that appeared to violate established Tau doctrine, spreading his warriors thin across multiple engagement zones. When questioned, he explained that he had identified a pattern in the enemy's response to Tau formations and had positioned his forces to exploit predictable counterattacks. The unorthodox approach resulted in a decisive victory, with minimal simulated casualties among his troops. This blend of innovation and effectiveness eventually brought Ashava to the attention of the legendary commander Pure Tide, perhaps the greatest military mind the Tau Empire had ever produced. Pure Tide had established an elite academy for promising Fire caste officers, selecting only those who displayed exceptional potential. Ashava's invitation to study under the master strategist marked a turning point in his career and life. Commander Pure Tide's approach to warfare was holistic, drawing on three distinct philosophical traditions within Tau military thought: the patient hunter, the swift strike, and the decisive blow. Where many students gravitated toward one tradition or another, Ashava displayed an unusual capacity to synthesize elements from all three approaches, adapting his tactics to suit the specific demands of each engagement. Under Pure Tide's tutelage, Ashava's natural talents were refined and honed. The young officer absorbed complex strategic principles, studying historical battles and participating in increasingly sophisticated simulations. Pure Tide pushed his protege to consider not just the immediate tactical situation, but the broader strategic context, including political ramifications and resource management. One of Pure Tide's most important lessons concerned the nature of different adversaries. The Tau Empire had encountered various xeno-species, and of course, the formidable Imperium of Man. Each enemy fought according to distinct patterns and principles. Oshawa proved particularly adept at analyzing these patterns and developing counters tailored to specific opponents. His analyses of orc psychology and Imperial Guard formations were considered so insightful that they were incorporated into the broader training curriculum for fire caste officers. During this period of intense study, Oshawa also began to develop his philosophy regarding battlefield technology. Unlike some of his peers who viewed technological superiority as the primary determinant of victory, Oshawa maintained that technology was merely a tool, effective only when wielded by warriors who understood its capabilities and limitations. This perspective would later influence his approach to battle suits and other advanced Tau weaponry. Oshawa's graduation from Pure Tide's academy coincided with a period of expansion for the Tau Empire. Having proven himself both in theoretical exercises and limited field engagements, he was promoted to Shasvar and given command of a hunter cadre. This new responsibility provided the opportunity to implement the strategies and tactics he had studied under Pure Tide in actual combat conditions. His first major campaign as a cadre leader targeted an orc-held world on the fringes of Tau space. Oshawa's approach demonstrated his tactical flexibility, employing rapid strikes against orc supply lines and communication hubs rather than engaging the numerically superior greenskin forces directly. By isolating orc warbands from each other, he was able to defeat them in detail, minimizing Tau casualties while systematically clearing the planet. The success of this campaign led to further promotion, and Oshawa attained the rank of Shassal, making him one of the youngest Tau to reach command level. As Shassal, he was entrusted with larger formations and more complex operations. It was during this period that he began to develop his own cadre of loyal officers, warriors who shared his aggressive, adaptable approach to warfare and who would later form the core of his command staff. Oshawa's rise through the ranks was not without controversy. Some within the fire caste, particularly those from more conservative septs, questioned whether his rapid advancement was justified by his experience. Others, especially among the Ethereal caste, expressed concern about his tendency to adapt or even disregard established doctrine when battlefield conditions warranted. These concerns were generally outweighed by his consistent record of success, but they planted seeds of tension that would later grow into more serious conflicts. The defining moment in Oshawa's early career came during a defensive action against an Imperial crusade targeting Tau colonies in what the humans called the Damocles Gulf. The Imperial forces, comprising elements from multiple Space Marine chapters and significant Imperial Guard assets, threatened to overwhelm Tau defenses through sheer numbers and firepower. Assigned to a critical sector, Oshawa faced Space Marines for the first time, an enemy whose capabilities far exceeded anything described in the tactical manuals. Rather than retreating in the face of these superhuman warriors, Oshawa studied their combat doctrines, identifying patterns and weaknesses. He observed that while individually formidable, Space Marines operated according to predictable tactical templates. By analyzing engagement data from multiple skirmishes, Oshawa developed counter-strategies that exploited the Marines' tendency to press advantages aggressively. In a decisive engagement on the plains of the colony world Daleth, Oshawa executed a complex series of feigned retreats, drawing Marine strike forces into carefully prepared killing zones where concentrated pulse weapon fire and seeker missile strikes could overcome even their formidable armor. The victory, though limited in strategic terms, demonstrated that the Adeptus Astartes were not invincible, boosting Tau morale throughout the sector. This performance earned Oshawa promotion to the rank of Shasso, commander, and with it came the ritual earning of his honorific name. For his mastery of close-quarters battlesuit tactics and his preference for engaging enemies at ranges shorter than Tau doctrine typically advised, he became known as Oshawa Farsight. As Commander Farsight, Oshawa was granted greater autonomy and resources, including command of his own cadre of elite warriors and access to the most advanced battlesuit technology. He continued to refine his approach to warfare, emphasizing rapid deployment, precise application of force, and tactical flexibility. His forces became known for their ability to adapt to changing battlefield conditions, often employing strategies that seemed to anticipate enemy movements before they occurred. Throughout this period of advancement and accomplishment, certain aspects of Farsight's character and philosophy were taking shape that would later set him apart from mainstream Tau society. His experiences against various enemies, particularly the Imperium and Orcs, led him to question some of the fundamental assumptions underlying the Tau approach to warfare and diplomacy. Unlike many of his peers, who viewed non-Tau species primarily through the lens of potential assimilation into the greater good, Farsight developed a more nuanced understanding of other cultures. He recognized that species like orcs could never be integrated into the Tau Empire, and that even potentially cooperative races might have values and traditions incompatible with Tau society. This perspective, while pragmatic, sometimes put him at odds with Ethereal directives emphasizing diplomatic solutions and cultural assimilation. Similarly, Farsight's battlefield experiences fostered a growing skepticism regarding certain aspects of Tau military doctrine. The emphasis on long-range engagement, while theoretically sound, often proved impractical against enemies like orcs and space marines who excelled at closing distances and forcing close-quarters combat. Farsight's adaptation to these realities, his development of tactics and technologies optimized for medium and short-range engagements, represented a significant departure from established practice. These emerging differences in philosophy and approach didn't immediately create friction between Farsight and the broader Tau leadership. His consistent success in achieving objectives and his formal adherence to the chain of command insulated him from serious criticism. However, the seeds of future conflict were being sown as Farsight's worldview and tactical doctrine evolved in directions increasingly divergent from orthodox Tau thinking. Oshiva's arrival at the remote mountain retreat, where Commander Pure Tide conducted his teachings, marked the beginning of his transformation from a promising officer to a master strategist. The monastery-like compound, perched high in the Koyan mountain range of Daleth, housed only a handful of students at any given time. These select few represented the finest tactical minds in the Tau Empire, chosen personally by Pure Tide or his representatives. The aging commander Pure Tide had by this time already established himself as the greatest military theorist in Tau history. His campaigns during the Second Sphere expansion had become legendary, with military academies across the empire studying his innovative approaches to warfare. Now partially paralyzed and confined to a specialized support suit, Pure Tide had withdrawn from active command to focus on training the next generation of fire caste leaders. Upon his arrival, Oshiva found himself in the company of other exceptional talents. Among them were two who would later become equally renowned: Shaso Kais, who displayed an almost supernatural aptitude for all aspects of warfare, and Shaso Shadowsun, whose mastery of stealth tactics and patient strategy marked her as exceptional even among this elite group. These three students, though different in temperament and approach, formed the core of what Tau military historians would later call the triumvirate of Pure Tide's legacy. Pure Tide's teaching methods were as unconventional as they were effective. Rather than relying solely on combat simulations or theoretical discussions, he often led his students on grueling hikes through the mountains, using the natural terrain to illustrate tactical principles. During these expeditions, he would suddenly present tactical problems, demanding immediate solutions that accounted for terrain, weather, and limited resources. The mountain does not yield to the warrior who fights against it, Pure Tide often told his students, but reveals paths to the one who understands its nature. This philosophy extended beyond literal mountaineering to encompass his entire approach to warfare, understanding the fundamental nature of conflict rather than merely mastering specific techniques. The cornerstone of Pure Tide's military philosophy rested on three distinct approaches to warfare, each with its own strengths and appropriate applications. The first, Koyan or patient hunter, emphasized careful preparation, misdirection, and the luring of enemies into carefully prepared traps. The second, Montka or killing blow, focused on identifying critical vulnerabilities and striking with overwhelming force at precisely the right moment. The third approach, less formally named but often described as the middle path, sought balance between the other two, adapting fluidly to changing circumstances. Most students naturally gravitated toward one approach or another based on their temperament and previous experience. Shadowsun displayed an immediate affinity for Koyan tactics, her methodical mind perfectly suited to the complex planning and patience required. Kai's, remarkably, showed equal proficiency in all three disciplines, earning Pure Tide's particular admiration for his versatility. Oshawa, with his virulent background and natural aggression, initially focused almost exclusively on Montka principles. He excelled in exercises that required rapid decision-making and decisive action, often completing Pure Tide's tactical challenges in ways that emphasized speed and overwhelming force. In one notable training exercise, when tasked with capturing a fortified position, Oshawa eschewed the expected approach of gradual encirclement, instead identifying a structural weakness in the fortification's design and concentrating his forces for a single, devastating strike that collapsed the enemy's defenses entirely. Pure Tide, while acknowledging Oshawa's natural talent for Montka, pushed him to develop a broader tactical repertoire. The warrior who knows only the hammer will see every problem as a nail, he cautioned his impetuous student. Under this guidance, Oshawa grudgingly began to incorporate elements of Koyan into his tactical approach, learning the value of patience and misdirection even within the context of aggressive operations. The relationship between the three primary students was complex. While united in their respect for Pure Tide and their dedication to the greater good, their different approaches to warfare created natural tension. Shadowsun and Oshawa, in particular, frequently clashed during tactical exercises, their fundamental philosophies often at odds. Where Shadowsun would advocate for careful preparation and minimal risk, Oshawa pushed for rapid engagement and acceptance of calculated losses to achieve greater objectives. These philosophical differences manifested most clearly during the annual combat trials, where Pure Tide students led simulated campaigns against each other. In these complex exercises, combining virtual elements with physical maneuvers in Daleth's wilderness, Oshawa and Shadowsun emerged as the most evenly matched opponents. Their confrontations became legendary among the Fire caste, with each developing increasingly sophisticated counters to the other's preferred tactics. One particularly notable trial, Oshawa appeared to abandon his usual Montka approach entirely, setting up an elaborate Koyan trap that Shadowsun, expecting his typical aggression, walked directly into. When she later questioned this unexpected change in tactics, Oshawa explained that the greatest expression of Montka was not simply striking hard, but striking precisely where and when the enemy least expected it, even if that meant adopting the appearance of Koyan to achieve the killing blow. This insight impressed even the stoic Pure Tide, who noted that Oshawa was beginning to transcend the rigid categories of Tau tactical doctrine. He understands that Montka and Koyan are not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a unified approach to warfare, Pure Tide reportedly told his aides. This is a rare insight, even among my most accomplished students. As their training progressed, Pure Tide assigned each student increasingly specialized projects based on their particular strengths. Shadowsun focused on developing new stealth tactics, incorporating the latest battlesuit technology, while Kai's worked on integrating auxiliary forces more effectively into Tau battle formations. Oshawa was tasked with analyzing engagement data from conflicts with Space Marines and other elite Imperial forces, developing counter tactics specifically designed to overcome these formidable opponents. This specialization allowed Oshawa to refine his understanding of close-quarters combat, an area traditionally underemphasized in Tau military doctrine. He pioneered new approaches to battlesuit deployment that maximized their mobility and firepower at medium and short ranges, directly countering the close assault tactics favored by many Imperial forces. These innovations, while sometimes viewed skeptically by more traditional commanders, proved remarkably effective in subsequent engagements with Space Marine forces. Throughout this period of intense study, Ashava maintained a disciplined routine that reflected his Viorlan upbringing. He rose before dawn each day for personal combat practice, focusing particularly on battle-suit maneuvers and targeting drills. His dedication to physical preparation matched his intellectual rigor, creating an integrated approach to warfare that balanced theoretical understanding with practical application. The final year of Ashava's tutelage under Pure Tide coincided with the legendary commander's declining health. Despite the best efforts of Earth caste medical specialists, Pure Tide's condition deteriorated rapidly, creating a sense of urgency among his students to absorb as much of his wisdom as possible before it was lost. During this period, Ashava spent countless hours in direct conversation with his mentor, recording and analyzing Pure Tide's insights on everything from formation tactics to the psychological aspects of leadership. As Pure Tide's death approached, the Ethereal Supreme made an unprecedented decision. Pure Tide's consciousness would be preserved through experimental Earth caste technology. Neural scanning devices recorded the Great Commander's tactical knowledge and decision-making processes, creating a comprehensive database of his military genius. From this database, the Earth caste created specialized teaching aids, neural engram chips that could be implanted in the brains of senior commanders, giving them direct access to Pure Tide's tactical insights. The original plan called for Pure Tide's most promising students, including Ashava, Shadowsun, and Kais, to receive hemisphere implants, more extensive neural interfaces that would integrate Pure Tide's tactical database directly into their cognitive processes. However, early tests revealed unexpected complications with these devices, including personality fragmentation and decision paralysis, as the recipient's mind conflicted with Pure Tide's recorded consciousness. Given these concerns, the Ethereal Supreme modified the program. Instead of hemisphere implants, Ashava and his fellow students received neural engram chips, less invasive devices that provided access to Pure Tide's knowledge without the risk of personality override. These chips functioned as tactical advisors rather than direct neural interfaces, allowing the commanders to consult Pure Tide's wisdom while maintaining their own decision-making authority. Ashava's graduation from Pure Tide's tutelage coincided with his receipt of this neural engram. In a solemn ceremony attended by senior Ethereals and fire caste commanders, the chip was ceremonially presented, representing both the culmination of his training and the beginning of his independent command career. The small, crystalline device contained tactical data specifically selected to complement Ashava's aggressive Montker approach, while providing balancing insights from Koyan methodology. The neural engram proved immediately valuable in Ashava's early independent campaigns. During the Arkanasha War against Orc invaders, he found himself able to anticipate greenskin tactics with unprecedented accuracy, combining his natural aggression with Pure Tide's more measured approach to achieve victories with minimal casualties. The engram didn't dictate his decisions, but rather expanded his tactical options, suggesting alternatives he might not have considered based on his natural inclinations. Unlike some recipients who became overly reliant on their engrams, consulting them for even minor decisions, Ashava maintained a balanced approach. He viewed the device as a resource rather than a crutch, integrating Pure Tide's insights into his own tactical framework rather than simply implementing them without question. This selective approach allowed him to develop his own command style while benefiting from his mentor's experience. As Ashava's reputation grew following successful campaigns against orcs and human worlds, his relationship with his fellow Pure Tide disciples evolved. Though their paths diverged geographically, with each assigned to different expansion fronts, they maintained communication and occasionally collaborated on larger operations. These collaborations highlighted both their shared tactical foundation and their distinctly different approaches to implementing Pure Tide's teachings. In joint operations with Shadowsun, Ashava typically took responsibility for direct engagement forces, while she commanded stealth and reconnaissance elements. This division of labor played to their respective strengths while creating a more balanced overall approach than either might have implemented independently. Senior Ethereals noted the effectiveness of these collaborations, often citing them as evidence of Pure Tide's success in creating commanders who could function both independently and as part of a cohesive team. Despite these successes, subtle differences in how each disciple interpreted Pure Tide's teachings began to emerge. Where Shadowsun viewed the neural engram as a direct link to their mentor's wisdom, to be consulted and followed with minimal deviation, Oshawa increasingly saw it as one input among many in his decision-making process. This distinction, seemingly minor at first, would later contribute to their diverging paths within the Tau military hierarchy. The period following Oshawa's graduation from Pure Tide's tutelage saw him rapidly ascend through the command ranks, his combination of natural talent and enhanced tactical knowledge making him one of the most effective field commanders in the Empire. His forces became known for their aggressive yet precise operations, typically achieving objectives with surprising speed while maintaining acceptable casualty rates. Throughout this ascent, Oshawa remained conscious of his debt to Pure Tide's teachings. He established a small academy of his own, passing on modified versions of Pure Tide's tactical principles to promising officers under his command. These teachings emphasized the integration of Montka and Koyan approaches, rather than treating them as separate disciplines, reflecting Oshawa's own evolution beyond the strict categories of traditional Tau military thought. The Damocles Gulf Crusade erupted in the latter half of the 41st millennium as the first major military confrontation between the rapidly expanding Tau Empire and the behemoth of the Imperium of Man. For Commander Oshawa, this conflict would not only test his tactical acumen against the most formidable adversary the Tau had ever faced, but would fundamentally reshape his understanding of warfare and the galaxy at large. The crusade began when Imperial authorities finally acknowledged the growing Tau presence along the eastern fringe. What had initially been dismissed as an insignificant Xenos civilization was now recognized as a legitimate threat to Imperial sovereignty. The Administratum, acting with characteristic bureaucratic delay but overwhelming force once mobilized, assembled a substantial crusading force comprising elements from the Imperial Guard, Imperial Navy, Adeptus Mechanicus, and several Space Marine chapters including the Ultramarines, Scythes of the Emperor, and White Scars. Oshawa, having recently attained the rank of commander, and now bearing his ceremonial name, Farsight, was assigned to the defense of the Sept world Daleth, one of the core worlds of the Tau Empire and a critical industrial and cultural center. Intelligence reports of the approaching Imperial Armada reached the Tau High Command weeks before the first engagements, providing valuable preparation time that Farsight utilized with characteristic efficiency. Rather than waiting passively for the Imperial assault, Farsight implemented a layered defense strategy that incorporated elements of both Montka and Koyan approaches. The outer system was seeded with sensor buoys and small mobile reconnaissance units tasked with gathering detailed information on Imperial fleet composition and movement patterns. Meanwhile, the primary defensive forces were organized into highly mobile hunter cadres capable of rapid redeployment as the tactical situation evolved. Farsight's first encounter with Imperial forces came at the Daleth system's edge, where an advanced detachment of Imperial Navy vessels pushed ahead of the main fleet to establish a beachhead. Rather than committing his full strength to this initial skirmish, Farsight deployed a small force of Barracuda fighters and Manta missile destroyers to harass the Imperial vanguard while gathering combat data on their weapons' capabilities and tactical doctrines. This preliminary engagement revealed several critical insights. Imperial vessels possessed significantly greater firepower than anything in the Tau Navy. Their void shields could withstand sustained pulse weapon fire, and their commanders favored direct, overwhelming assaults rather than subtle maneuvers. Farsight incorporated these observations into his evolving defense plan, adjusting Tau formations to emphasize mobility and concentrated fire rather than attempting to match Imperial firepower directly. As the main Imperial fleet approached Daleth, Farsight implemented the next phase of his strategy. Rather than attempting to prevent the Imperials from establishing a planetary foothold, an impossible task given the disparity in fleet strength, he focused on controlling where and how the enemy forces would make landfall. Using a series of feigned weaknesses in the orbital defense network, Farsight channeled the initial Imperial landings toward areas of the planet where the terrain would negate many of their advantages in heavy armor and artillery. The first wave of Imperial Guard regiments, primarily composed of Brimlock Dragoons and Mordian Iron Guard, established fortified positions in the eastern coastal regions of Daleth's primary continent. These disciplined human soldiers advanced methodically, securing each position before moving forward in textbook military fashion. Against less prepared defenders, such tactics would have been devastatingly effective. Against Farsight's forces, they created predictable patterns that could be exploited. Farsight's response to these initial landings demonstrated his tactical flexibility and deep understanding of Imperial military doctrine. Rather than engaging the Guard regiments directly, he deployed small, highly mobile fire warrior teams supported by pathfinders to harass their supply lines and communication networks. These precision strikes forced the Imperial commanders to divert significant resources to protect their logistical infrastructure, slowing their advance and creating vulnerabilities in their front-line formations. Meanwhile, Farsight gathered intelligence on a more dangerous development: the arrival of Adeptus Astartes strike forces. Space Marines from the Ultramarines and Scythes of the Emperor chapters had established forward operating bases in Daleth's northern mountain ranges, preparing for surgical strikes against key Tau command and control nodes. These superhuman warriors represented a threat of an entirely different magnitude than the Imperial Guard regiments, combining formidable individual combat prowess with sophisticated tactical awareness. Recognizing that conventional Tau infantry formations would be outmatched in direct confrontations with Astartes, Farsight accelerated the deployment of his crisis battlesuit teams. These advanced combat platforms, sophisticated armored exoskeletons equipped with various weapon systems, could theoretically match Space Marines in terms of mobility and firepower, if not in close combat capability. Farsight personally led several of these crisis teams, refining their coordination and tactical approach through direct battlefield experience. The first major engagement between Farsight's crisis teams and Space Marine forces occurred in the Kessin Valley, where an Ultramarine strike force was attempting to secure a strategic mountain pass leading to a major Tau population center. Conventional Tau doctrine would have dictated engaging these elite enemies at maximum range, utilizing the superior reach of pulse weaponry to whittle down the Astartes before they could close to effective bolter range. Farsight, however, recognized that the terrain negated this advantage. The narrow valley and heavy forest cover would allow the Space Marines to advance under partial cover, minimizing the effectiveness of long-range fire. Instead, he implemented a radical new approach that would later become his tactical signature: close-range crisis suit deployment. Using specially modified devilfish transports, Farsight's crisis teams were delivered directly into the midst of the advancing Ultramarines formation. The suddenness of this maneuver achieved complete tactical surprise, momentarily disrupting even the legendary discipline of the Astartes. Crisis suits armed with burst cannons and fusion blasters engaged at point-blank range, where their firepower could overcome even ceramite power armor. The Battle of Kessin Valley lasted less than 30 minutes, but represented a pivotal moment in Tau military doctrine. Farsight's crisis teams suffered significant casualties. Approximately 40% of the deployed suits were destroyed or severely damaged, but they inflicted disproportionate losses on the Ultramarines' force, forcing them to withdraw and reconsider their approach. More importantly, the engagement demonstrated that Tau forces could successfully engage even the Imperium's elite warriors when employing appropriate tactics. Following this success, Farsight expanded and refined his crisis suit deployment strategies. He organized specialized teams with complementary weapon loadouts, developed new formation patterns that maximized overlapping fields of fire, and implemented precise drop zone calculations that placed crisis teams in optimal positions relative to enemy formations. These innovations spread rapidly through Tau forces defending Daleth, as other commanders recognized their effectiveness against Imperial threats. The name Farsight took on new significance during this period. Originally bestowed for his exceptional targeting abilities and tactical foresight, it now became associated specifically with his innovative battlesuit tactics. Fire warriors across Daleth spoke of Farsight drops and Farsight formations, adopting his methods even without direct orders from the command structure. This organic spread of tactical innovation represented a rare departure from the typically hierarchical Tau military organization. As the Damocles Crusade intensified, Imperial forces consolidated their beachheads and began pushing toward Daleth's major urban centers. The planetary capital, with its concentrated population and critical infrastructure, became the focus of a major Imperial offensive spearheaded by Brimlock Dragoon armor columns supported by Titan Legion elements. These massive war machines, towering over even the largest Tau battlesuits, represented a threat that conventional Tau forces were ill-equipped to counter. Farsight's response to this escalation again demonstrated his tactical adaptability. Recognizing that the Tau lacked weapons platforms capable of directly matching Imperial Titans, he implemented an asymmetric approach focusing on mobility and coordinated strikes. Hammerhead tanks equipped with railguns were deployed in dispersed formations, concentrating fire on specific structural weaknesses in the Titan's legs and weapon mounts before rapidly relocating to avoid counter-battery fire. Meanwhile, Farsight led a specialized crisis team equipped with fusion blasters in precision strikes against the smaller Imperial armor elements. These attacks specifically targeted command vehicles and support units, degrading the effectiveness of the overall Imperial formation without directly engaging its strongest elements. This approach frustrated Imperial commanders, who found themselves unable to bring their superior firepower to bear effectively against the elusive Tau forces. The defense of Daleth's capital reached its climax when the Imperial command deployed a full battle group of the Adeptus Mechanicus, including several Warlord and Reaver Titans. These god machines advanced across the eastern plains toward the city, their void shields shrugging off conventional Tau fire, and their massive weapon systems obliterating everything in their path. Planetary evacuation protocols were initiated as Tau commanders acknowledged the impossibility of stopping these behemoths with available forces. Farsight, however, refused to concede the capital without attempting one final, desperate stratagem. Gathering every operational crisis suit on the continent, nearly 300 in total, he implemented what would later be recorded in Tau military archives as the Montka of Titans. This complex operation began with a series of diversionary attacks by conventional forces, drawing the attention of Imperial commanders, while Farsight's crisis teams approached from multiple vectors at low altitude. The coordinated assault began with a precision strike by broadside battlesuits, their heavy rail rifles targeting the knee joints and ankle actuators of the massive war machines. As the Titans adjusted their void shields to repel this threat, Farsight's crisis teams executed their drop, landing directly on the carapaces and upper structures of the Titans themselves. At this range, even the Titans' formidable void shields provided no protection, allowing fusion blasters to burn through armor plating and sever critical control systems. The battle lasted nearly 6 hours, with crisis teams systematically disabling one Titan after another, while suffering grievous losses to point defense weapons and Imperial counterattacks. Farsight himself led the assault on the command Titan, personally destroying its primary plasma reactor with a precisely placed fusion blast that initiated a catastrophic chain reaction. The resulting explosion severely damaged several nearby Titans and created a temporary gap in the Imperial advance. This unexpected setback, combined with mounting losses across multiple fronts and strategic developments elsewhere in the sector, contributed to the Imperial High Command's eventual decision to halt the Damocles Crusade. The emergence of Hive Fleet Behemoth and the pressing need to redirect military resources against this existential threat forced the Imperium to establish a temporary ceasefire with the Tau Empire, effectively ending the immediate threat to Daleth. The defense of Daleth transformed Farsight from a promising commander into a legendary figure within Tau society. His innovative tactics, particularly regarding crisis suit deployment, were formally incorporated into empire-wide military doctrine. The term Farsight Drop entered the standard Tau military lexicon, describing the technique of deploying crisis teams directly into close range with enemy formations to maximize firepower impact. Beyond tactical innovations, the Damocles Gulf Crusade profoundly affected Farsight's understanding of the wider galaxy and the Tau Empire's place within it. Direct exposure to Imperial forces, their fanaticism, their technological capabilities, and their seemingly limitless numbers challenged many of the assumptions underlying Tau expansion policy. The Empire had encountered human worlds before, but never the full might of the Imperium mobilized for war. Farsight's detailed observations of Imperial tactics and technology during the Crusade provided invaluable intelligence for the Tau Empire. His after-action reports included comprehensive analyses of Space Marine combat doctrines, Imperial Guard formation patterns, and Adeptus Mechanicus weapon capabilities. These insights helped shape Tau military development for decades afterward, informing everything from battlesuit design specifications to planetary defense protocols. More subtly, the Crusade exposed Farsight to aspects of human culture and psychology that contradicted official Tau understanding of the species. Prior to the conflict, Tau diplomatic and military doctrine regarded humans as potentially reasonable beings who could be brought into the greater good through appropriate persuasion, or, if necessary, limited application of force. The religious fanaticism and xenophobic hatred displayed by Imperial forces suggested a more complex reality. Human prisoners taken during the conflict became objects of intense study for Farsight. He personally interviewed captured Imperial Guard officers, attempting to understand their motivations and beliefs. These conversations revealed the depth of Imperial indoctrination. Many prisoners preferred death to cooperation, viewing the Tau as abominable xenos deserving only extermination. Such implacable hostility challenged the fundamental Tau belief in the universality of the greater good as a unifying principle. In the wake of the Damocles Gulf Crusade, the Tau Empire found itself at a critical juncture. The conflict had revealed both the strengths and vulnerabilities of Tau military doctrine when faced with the overwhelming might of the Imperium of Man. Despite the successful defense of Daleth and the subsequent ceasefire, the Ethereal Supreme Council recognized the need for continued expansion and consolidation of Tau territory to secure the Empire's future. It was in this context that the Farsight expedition was conceived. Following extensive strategic deliberations among the highest echelons of Tau leadership, Commander Farsight was tasked with leading an ambitious campaign beyond the Damocles Gulf. The expedition's primary objective was straightforward in concept but monumental in scope: to establish and secure new colonies in the unexplored regions beyond the Empire's eastern frontier, creating a buffer zone against future Imperial aggression while incorporating new worlds into the greater good. The forces assembled for this expedition represented one of the largest military contingents ever deployed by the Tau Empire. At its core were the veteran cadres that had served under Farsight during the defense of Daleth, battle-hardened warriors intimately familiar with his tactical approach and command style. These were supplemented by fresh troops from Viorla, Oshava's home sept, known for their aggressive combat doctrine and exceptional martial prowess. Supporting these fire caste elements were substantial earth caste contingents, equipped with the latest terraforming and construction technologies, essential for establishing viable colonies on newly claimed worlds. Water caste diplomats and administrators were included to manage relations with any sentient species encountered and to establish governance structures for new settlements. Overseeing the entire expedition were several Ethereals, including the respected Anva, whose presence ensured that all activities would align with the greater good. Farsight's command structure for the expedition reflected his experiences during the Damocles Crusade. He organized his forces into highly mobile hunter cadres, capable of operating independently for extended periods while maintaining cohesive strategic coordination. Crisis battlesuit teams formed the elite core of these formations, implementing the close engagement tactics that had proven so effective against Imperial forces. Each cadre included integrated reconnaissance elements, typically Pathfinder teams equipped with advanced sensor arrays, providing the tactical intelligence that Farsight's aggressive approach required. The expedition fleet departed from Daleth in the year 968 of the 41st millennium, comprising dozens of major vessels and hundreds of smaller craft. The journey through the Damocles Gulf was methodical, with scout ships ranging ahead of the main fleet to identify navigational hazards and potential threats. Unlike Imperial warp travel, the Tau fleet relied on a series of controlled short jumps using their limited FTL technology, making the crossing significantly slower but more predictable than Imperium methods. The first major planetary system encountered beyond the Gulf presented an immediate opportunity. Designated as FC-92 by Tau cartographers, the system contained 3 potentially habitable worlds orbiting a stable G-type star. Preliminary scans indicated no signs of advanced technological civilization, though the second planet showed evidence of primitive non-sapient life forms. Farsight ordered comprehensive surveys of all 3 worlds, deploying Earth caste scientific teams under military escort to assess colonization potential. These surveys confirmed FC-92-2 as the most suitable candidate for immediate settlement. Within weeks, Earth caste engineers had established the foundation of what would become the first colony of the expedition, including defensive perimeters, atmospheric processors, and basic infrastructure. Water caste administrators began the process of organizing supply lines back to established Tau territory, ensuring the nascent colony would remain connected to the broader empire. Farsight personally oversaw the defensive arrangements, applying lessons learned from the Damocles Crusade. Rather than concentrating defenses around the primary settlement, he implemented a dispersed network of overlapping fire bases, each capable of supporting the others while covering key approach vectors. Orbital defense platforms were positioned at strategic Lagrange points, providing early warning capabilities and limited strike capacity against potential void-based threats. With FC-92-2 secured and development proceeding according to schedule, the expedition continued its push into unexplored space. Over the following months, 5 additional systems were surveyed and 3 more colonies established. Each new settlement followed the same pattern: rapid assessment, strategic deployment of resources, and establishment of layered defenses before the main fleet moved onward. This methodical approach allowed the expedition to maintain momentum while ensuring newly claimed territories remained secure. The first significant challenge came approximately 8 months into the expedition, when advanced scouts reported unusual energy signatures from a previously uncharted system. Approaching cautiously, Farsight's fleet discovered a small human outpost on the 3rd planet of the system. Unlike the fanatical Imperial forces encountered during the Damocles Crusade, these humans appeared to be independent colonists, possibly separated from the Imperium for generations, or deliberately existing beyond its reach. Following standard Tau protocols for contact with potentially cooperative species, Farsight dispatched water caste diplomats under military escort to establish communication. Initial contacts were tense but productive, with the human colonists cautiously receptive to Tau overtures. Unlike their Imperial counterparts, these isolated humans lacked the ingrained xenophobia that characterized mainstream Imperial culture, allowing for meaningful dialogue about potential integration into the greater good. Over several weeks, negotiations progressed from basic non-aggression agreements to more substantive discussions about technological exchange and mutual defense. The humans possessed certain agricultural techniques adapted to the local environment that interested Earth caste scientists, while Tau medical technology and energy systems represented significant advancements over the colonists' capabilities. Ethereal Onva personally participated in the later stages of these negotiations, his presence helping to secure a formal treaty incorporating the human settlement as an auxiliary component of the Tau Empire. This diplomatic success bolstered the expedition's confidence and reinforced the underlying philosophy of the greater good, that different species could indeed find common purpose through cooperation rather than conflict. For Farsight, however, the encounter raised questions about the true nature of humanity. If these colonists could so readily accept cooperation with the Tau, what did that suggest about the fanaticism of the Imperium? Was human xenophobia innate, or merely the product of imperial indoctrination? As the expedition pushed further beyond charted space, they encountered increasingly diverse planetary environments requiring adaptive colonization strategies. On FC-118 IV, extreme temperature variations necessitated the development of specialized habitation modules capable of withstanding both scorching days and freezing nights. The mineral-rich moons of FC-126 presented valuable mining opportunities, but required extensive void-based infrastructure to exploit effectively. Each new colony expanded the expedition's logistical requirements, creating increasingly complex supply chains stretching back to established Tau territory. Farsight addressed this challenge by establishing regional coordination centers at strategic intervals, each overseen by a trusted commander with authority to reallocate resources as needed. This decentralized approach maintained operational flexibility while ensuring no single colony would be left vulnerable due to administrative delays or communication gaps. Approximately 15 months into the expedition, long-range sensors detected a significant anomaly in a nearby system. Initial scans suggested extensive artificial structures of unknown origin, potentially indicating an advanced civilization. Farsight approached the system with heightened caution, deploying stealth reconnaissance craft to gather detailed intelligence before committing the main fleet. These reconnaissance missions revealed an unexpected and disturbing reality. The system was home to a substantial Orc presence. The Greenskins had infested the fourth planet and several large asteroids, converting much of the available material into crude but effective war machines. Though the Orc population appeared to be in a relatively early stage of development, lacking the massive space hulks and attack moons characteristic of a full-fledged WOG, they represented a significant threat to nearby Tau colonies. Farsight convened a strategic council to determine the appropriate response. Some advisors, particularly those from the water caste, advocated bypassing the system entirely, arguing that engaging the Orcs would divert precious resources from the expedition's primary colonization objectives. Others, mainly fire caste commanders, insisted that leaving such a threat unchecked would eventually endanger everything the expedition had accomplished. After carefully considering all perspectives and consulting with the Ethereals, Farsight made his decision. The Orc presence would be eliminated. Unlike potential allies who might be incorporated into the greater good, Orcs represented a purely destructive force incapable of peaceful coexistence. Moreover, Farsight's experiences during previous conflicts with Greenskins had taught him that Orc populations, if left unchecked, inevitably expanded into larger, more dangerous formations. The campaign against the Orcs demonstrated Farsight's tactical brilliance and his deep understanding of Greenskin psychology. Rather than engaging the Orcs in a direct assault that would trigger their instinctive love of combat, he implemented a strategy of systematic isolation and targeted strikes. Orbital bombardments destroyed key infrastructure connecting different Orc settlements, while precision raids by crisis teams eliminated emerging Orc leaders before they could unify disparate tribes. This approach frustrated the Orcs' natural tendency to coalesce around strong leaders and denied them the large-scale battles they craved. Without the stimulation of proper warfare, the Greenskin population began to fragment, with individual tribes turning against each other in search of conflict. Farsight exploited these internal divisions, selectively eliminating certain tribes while allowing others to exhaust themselves in internecine conflicts. Over 2 months of carefully orchestrated operations, the Orc presence in the system was reduced from a potential existential threat to a collection of scattered, disorganized warbands. With the immediate danger neutralized, Farsight established a permanent monitoring station in the system, tasked with preventing any resurgence of organized Orc activity. The expedition then resumed its primary mission, having demonstrated both the effectiveness of Tau military doctrine against Xeno's threats and Farsight's particular skill in implementing that doctrine. The expedition continued its methodical expansion, establishing a total of 17 colonies across 9 star systems over the course of 3 years. Each new settlement strengthened the Tau presence beyond the Damocles Gulf, creating a substantial buffer zone against potential imperial aggression while extending the reach of the greater good into previously unclaimed regions of space. Earth caste engineers developed increasingly efficient terraforming techniques, reducing the time required to make newly claimed worlds habitable for Tau colonists. Throughout this period of expansion, Farsight maintained regular communication with the Tau Empire's central leadership, submitting detailed reports on the expedition's progress and receiving periodic updates on developments within established Tau territory. These communications became increasingly delayed as the expedition pushed further from the Empire's core, with message drones sometimes taking months to complete the journey between the farthest colonies and Daleth. The turning point of the expedition came in the 4th year, when scout vessels identified a world of unusual composition in a previously unexplored system. Designated Arthas Moloch by expedition cartographers, the planet exhibited strange energy signatures unlike anything previously encountered. Initial surveys detected extensive ruins of clearly artificial origin, suggesting an ancient civilization had once inhabited the world. Most intriguingly, certain energy patterns emanating from the ruins bore similarities to warp signatures, though different from those associated with Imperial technology. Ethereal Anva, recognizing the potential significance of this discovery, personally led the initial survey team to Arthas Moloch's surface. Accompanied by several other Ethereals and a substantial fire caste security detachment, including crisis teams commanded by Farsight himself, the expedition established a research base near the largest concentration of ruins. Earth caste scientists began cataloging and analyzing the ancient structures, attempting to decipher their purpose and origin. Initial findings suggested the ruins predated Tau civilization by thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of years. The unknown builders had possessed technology far beyond current Tau capabilities, particularly in areas related to energy manipulation and what Earth caste theorists tentatively identified as warp interface systems. Anva authorized expanded research efforts, directing additional scientific resources to unraveling the mysteries of Arthas Moloch. 3 weeks into the research operation, long-range sensors detected multiple objects approaching the Arthas Moloch system at high velocity. The object's trajectory and speed matched known patterns of Orc voidcraft, suggesting a significant greenskin force had somehow tracked the expedition to this location. Farsight immediately implemented defensive protocols, positioning the expedition's military assets to intercept the approaching threat while evacuating non-essential personnel from the planet's surface. The Orc attack, when it came, exceeded all expectations in its ferocity and scale. Unlike the disorganized tribes encountered earlier in the expedition, these greenskins operated with unusual coordination, suggesting the presence of a particularly cunning warboss. Multiple attack craft breached Tau defensive lines, delivering Orc boarding parties directly to the research facilities on Arthas Moloch's surface. Farsight led the defense personally, deploying his crisis teams in close support formations around the primary research compound where Anva and the other Ethereals continued their work. The fighting was intense and chaotic, with Orcs pressing forward in seemingly endless waves, their crude but effective weapons taking a heavy toll on Tau defenders. Despite the tactical sophistication of Farsight's battlesuit maneuvers, the sheer number of attackers threatened to overwhelm the defensive perimeter. As the battle reached its climax, a particularly massive Orc breakthrough force smashed through the eastern defensive line, creating a direct path to the central research facility. Farsight redirected all available crisis teams to counter this threat, but found himself cut off from the Ethereal leadership by a separate Orc assault. Communications with the research facility became sporadic, then failed entirely as the fighting intensified. When Farsight finally fought his way to the central compound hours later, he discovered a scene of devastation. The facility had been largely destroyed, with signs of intense fighting throughout the ruins. Most significantly, Anva and all other Ethereals who had accompanied the expedition to Arthas Moloch were dead, their bodies showing evidence of both orc violence and strange energy discharges, unlike typical greenskin weapons. The loss of the Ethereals represented a catastrophic blow to the expedition. Beyond their leadership role, the Ethereals provided essential spiritual and psychological guidance to Tau society. Their presence reinforced commitment to the greater good and maintained social cohesion across the different castes. Without them, the expedition faced not only a leadership vacuum, but a potential crisis of morale and purpose. In the immediate aftermath of the battle, Farsight focused on practical necessities, securing the remaining research facilities, treating wounded personnel, and establishing a defensive perimeter against potential further attacks. Earth caste scientists worked frantically to salvage what data they could from the damaged research equipment, while water caste administrators attempted to maintain order among increasingly distraught colonists. The aftermath of the Orc attack on Arthas Moloch left Commander Farsight in an unprecedented situation. With all Ethereals dead and communications to the Tau Empire severely delayed by distance, he faced the immediate challenge of maintaining expedition cohesion while pursuing the mysteries that had drawn them to this ancient world. The ruins that had so captivated the fallen Ethereals remained largely unexplored, their secrets still buried beneath millennia of dust and decay. 3 days after securing the perimeter around the primary research zone, Farsight organized a specialized reconnaissance team. Comprising his most trusted crisis suit pilots, Earth caste researchers with expertise in xenoarchaeology, and a contingent of pathfinders for security, the team's mission was to penetrate deeper into the central ruins, where the most unusual energy signatures had been detected. Farsight himself led the expedition, his red battlesuit modified with additional scanning equipment to record anything of potential tactical or scientific value. The ruins of Arthas Moloch defied conventional Tau understanding of architecture. Massive stone structures blended seamlessly with metallic components of unknown composition, creating labyrinthine passages that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Earth caste sensors detected minute energy pulses flowing through what appeared to be inert material, suggesting the entire complex might function as a single, integrated system rather than discrete buildings. As the team penetrated deeper into the ruins, environmental conditions began to change subtly. Temperature fluctuations occurred without apparent cause, atmospheric pressure varied between chambers with no visible barriers, and most disturbingly, some team members reported hearing whispers just at the edge of audibility. Farsight, protected by his battlesuit's environmental systems and focused on the mission, pressed forward despite growing unease among the research staff. The central chamber, when they finally reached it, presented a stark contrast to the chaotic architecture of the surrounding ruins. A perfect hemisphere carved from black stone, its walls inscribed with symbols that defied Tau linguistic analysis. At the chamber's center stood a simple stone dais, and upon it rested what appeared to be a weapon, a blade of extraordinary length and unusual design, its surface gleaming with an inner light that shifted between colors in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Earth caste researchers immediately deployed scanning equipment, maintaining careful distance from the artifact as they recorded its physical properties and energy emissions. Preliminary readings indicated the blade was composed of materials unknown to Tau metallurgy, with an internal structure that appeared to violate several understood principles of physics. Most significantly, the energy signature emanating from the weapon-matched patterns detected throughout the ruins, suggesting it might be a control node or power source for the entire complex. While the researchers worked, Farsight's tactical systems detected movement at the chamber's periphery. Shadows seemed to deepen and flow independently of the team's light sources, coalescing into forms that resembled no species known to the Tau. The commander ordered an immediate defensive formation, crisis suits forming a protective ring around the research team, while pathfinders trained pulse carbines on the shifting darkness. The attack, when it came, defied conventional combat logic. Rather than physical entities, the team faced what could only be described as manifestations of pure malevolence, semi-corporeal shapes that passed through solid matter while leaving psychic impressions of rage, hunger, and ancient hatred. Standard pulse weapons proved ineffective, energy discharges passing harmlessly through the apparitions while they closed on the increasingly panicked Tau. Farsight's neural engram chip, the repository of Pure Tide's tactical wisdom, offered no solutions to this unprecedented threat. For perhaps the first time in his military career, the commander faced an enemy that could not be defeated through conventional strategy or firepower. As the manifestations converged on the research team, several Earth caste members collapsed, blood flowing from eyes and ears as their minds buckled under psychic assault. In that moment of crisis, Farsight made a decision that would alter his destiny and that of his followers. Leaping to the central dais, he seized the ancient blade from its resting place. The weapon, impossibly light for its size, seemed to respond to his touch, its shifting colors stabilizing into a brilliant azure glow that illuminated the entire chamber. As Farsight raised the blade, energy cascaded from its edge, tearing through the spectral attackers and dissolving their forms into dissipating mist. The immediate threat neutralized, Farsight turned his attention to the wounded. 3 Earth caste researchers had died during the attack, their bodies showing no physical trauma, but their facial expressions frozen in expressions of absolute terror. Several others exhibited symptoms of severe neurological damage, unable to speak coherently or focus their eyes. The Pathfinders, though physically unharmed, displayed signs of psychological trauma, their typically disciplined demeanor replaced by nervous agitation. Farsight ordered an immediate withdrawal from the ruins, personally carrying the ancient blade as the team retreated to the surface. Throughout the extraction, the weapon continued to emit its azure glow, seemingly responding to the commander's movements and perhaps, though this thought came to him only later, his intentions. No further manifestations appeared during the withdrawal, as though the blade's activation had somehow neutralized or repelled the entities throughout the complex. Upon returning to the expedition's forward base, Farsight established a secure research facility specifically for studying the recovered artifact. Earth caste scientists, working in shifts to minimize exposure to the blade's unusual energy field, conducted extensive analysis of its composition and properties. Their findings, compiled over several weeks, painted a disturbing picture of a weapon that defied conventional understanding. The blade, soon dubbed the Dawn Blade for its radiant glow, possessed molecular structures unlike any known material. Its edge, when examined under maximum magnification, appeared impossibly sharp, terminating not in a finite width but seeming to narrow infinitely beyond the resolution of Tau scanning technology. More concerning were the energy patterns emanating from the weapon, which exhibited similarities to warp signatures detected by Tau vessels during encounters with Imperial ships entering or leaving the Immaterium. Most disturbing of all were the biological effects observed in those who spent extended time near the Dawn Blade. Research assistants reported unusual dreams, persistent headaches, and in some cases, brief auditory hallucinations. These symptoms intensified with proximity to the artifact and duration of exposure. Farsight himself, who maintained possession of the blade during this period, noted no such effects, a fact that puzzled Earth caste researchers, but which they attributed to the protective systems of his crisis suit. As research continued, the expedition faced mounting challenges on multiple fronts. The loss of the Ethereals created governance issues across the newly established colonies, with traditional caste hierarchies beginning to blur in the absence of their spiritual leadership. Supply chains stretched across dozens of light years showed signs of strain, with resource allocation becoming increasingly contentious between settlements. Most concerning, long-range sensors detected increased orc activity in nearby systems, suggesting the Greenskins might be regrouping for another assault. Farsight addressed these challenges with characteristic decisiveness. He established a provisional governing council comprising representatives from all castes, with himself as military commander, but deliberately avoiding the spiritual authority traditionally held by Ethereals. Resource distribution was systematized based on objective metrics of need rather than traditional allocation patterns. Military assets were repositioned to create a defensive network covering all established colonies, with rapid response forces positioned at strategic junctures. Throughout this period of reorganization, Farsight continued to study and train with the Dawn Blade. The weapon, despite its enormous size, handled with impossible lightness in his grip, its balance perfect regardless of how he wielded it. In private combat drills, he discovered the blade could cut through virtually any material, from standard armor plate to the reinforced ceramite of salvaged Space Marine components. Most significantly, it appeared to disrupt energy fields on contact, suggesting potential effectiveness against force fields and similar defensive technologies. Approximately 2 months after the discovery of the Dawn Blade, the anticipated Orc counterattack materialized. A substantial greenskin fleet, comprising dozens of crude but effective vessels, entered the Arthas Moloch system on an attack vector toward the primary Tau research base. Farsight mobilized all available defensive assets, implementing a layered response strategy designed to whittle down the Orc forces before they could make planetfall. The Void battle proceeded according to plan, with Tau hunter cadres engaging Orc ships at maximum range and withdrawing before the Greenskins could close to boarding distance. This hit-and-run approach frustrated the Orcs' preference for close combat while steadily reducing their numbers through accumulated damage to critical systems. Nevertheless, the sheer number of attack craft ensured that some would reach the planet's surface, necessitating ground defense operations. Farsight personally led the defense of the primary research facility, where analysis of the Dawn Blade continued. Mounted in his signature Crisis battle suit and carrying the ancient weapon externally attached to the suit's manipulator systems, he positioned his forces in a flexible defensive formation designed to channel the Orc attackers into prepared killing zones. As the first wave of greenskin drop pods and crude landing craft breached the atmosphere, Tau fire teams opened up with coordinated volleys of pulse fire, cutting down dozens of Orcs before they could properly organize. The battle quickly escalated as more Orc forces made planetfall. Crude but effective greenskin vehicles, battle wagons, warbages, and looted Tau equipment pushed toward the defensive perimeter, their ramshackle construction belying their deadly effectiveness. Tau hammerhead tanks and broadside battlesuits engaged these threats at maximum range, their rail weapons punching through Orc armor with devastating precision. When a particularly massive Orc warboss, clad in hulking mega armor and surrounded by heavily augmented knobs, broke through the eastern defensive line, Farsight made a fateful decision. Rather than coordinating the defense from the rear as conventional doctrine dictated, he personally engaged the Orc leadership element, using his crisis suit's jetpack to drop directly into their midst. The Dawn Blade, now wielded in his battlesuit's manipulator arms, flashed with brilliant light as it met the crude power claw of the warboss. What followed astonished even the battle-hardened Tau veterans who witnessed it. The Dawn Blade passed through the warboss's armor as though it were paper, severing mechanical components and flesh with equal ease. The massive greenskin, easily 3 times the size of Farsight's battlesuit, collapsed in a shower of sparks and viscera. As it fell, Farsight noted a strange phenomenon. Wisps of greenish energy seemed to flow from the fallen Orc into the blade, which momentarily glowed brighter before returning to its usual azure radiance. The death of their leader threw the Orc forces into disarray, with individual mobs turning on each other as much as continuing to attack the Tau positions. Farsight exploited this confusion, leading targeted strikes against secondary Orc leaders and critical war assets. Throughout this operation, the Dawn Blade proved supernaturally effective, cutting through the heaviest armor and disrupting energy fields with ease. Each significant kill seemed to momentarily intensify the blade's glow, though Farsight, focused on the tactical situation, did not immediately recognize the pattern. Over the following hours, Tau forces systematically eliminated the remaining Orc resistance. Casualties among the defenders were significant but acceptable, with approximately 20% of engaged units lost or severely damaged. The greenskin forces were utterly destroyed, with no organized resistance remaining within the research zone. Salvage teams began the process of securing and analyzing Orc technology, particularly focusing on how the greenskins had located Arthas Moloch despite the expedition's attempts at operational security. In the battle's aftermath, Farsight noticed an unexpected physical change. Minor injuries sustained during the fighting, a strained shoulder joint from manipulating the oversized blade, bruising from impact against his battlesuit's interior during particularly violent maneuvers, had healed with unusual rapidity. Medical examination revealed cellular regeneration rates significantly above Tau baseline, with no apparent explanation for the enhancement. Earth caste researchers, correlating this phenomenon with observed energy transfers during the battle, developed a disturbing hypothesis about the Dawn Blade's true nature. Further testing confirmed their suspicions. The ancient weapon appeared to absorb life energy from those it killed, transferring a portion of that energy to its wielder. This process enhanced cellular regeneration, improved neural response times, and potentially extended lifespan by reducing telomere degradation during cell division. In essence, the Dawn Blade was stealing the remaining years of life from its victims and granting them to whoever wielded it. The implications of this discovery were profound. Based on the number and species of enemies Farsight had killed during the Orc assault, Earth caste xenobiologists estimated he had already absorbed decades of additional lifespan. Given the Orcs' unusual biology, particularly their fungal reproductive system and extraordinary regenerative capabilities, each significant greenskin killed by the blade might have transferred centuries of potential life to its wielder. Farsight received this information with characteristic stoicism, outwardly showing little reaction to the news that he might now live far longer than the typical Tau lifespan of around 40 years. Privately, however, the revelation forced a reevaluation of his plans and priorities. The expedition had been conceived as a decades-long project, with leadership expected to transition between generations as older commanders died and younger ones took their place. If Farsight would now outlive multiple generations of his followers, traditional Tau command structures might prove inadequate. More immediately concerning were the ethical implications of the blade's function. Tau philosophy, centered on the greater good, emphasized collective benefit over individual advantage. A weapon that extended one individual's life by harvesting the potential years of others seemed fundamentally opposed to these principles. Yet the tactical advantages offered by the Dawn Blade, its ability to cut through any material, disrupt energy fields, and neutralize warp manifestations, made it too valuable to discard, particularly given the expedition's isolation from Tau Empire support. The discovery of the Dawn Blade's life-draining properties coincided with another significant development. Long-range communications from the Tau Empire, delayed by months due to the vast distances involved, arrived carrying troubling news. The Empire had suffered significant setbacks in Farsight's absence, with Imperial forces pushing back against Tau expansion in several sectors. More concerning, the message contained explicit orders for the expedition to return to Tau space, abandoning their newly established colonies to reinforce the Empire's defensive positions. The revelation of the Dawn Blade's life-stealing properties marked a turning point in Farsight's understanding of the universe. As he stood in the research facility, examining the data collected by Earth caste scientists, the commander faced an uncomfortable truth. The weapon he now possessed operated on principles that defied Tau's scientific understanding and challenged the fundamental tenets of the greater good. In the months following the Orc attack on Arthas Malak, Farsight dedicated significant resources to investigating the ruins where the Dawn Blade had been discovered. Earth caste researchers, working under enhanced security protocols, methodically documented the strange architecture and inscrutable symbols that covered the ancient structures. Their findings painted a disturbing picture of a civilization far older and more advanced than the Tau, one that possessed intimate knowledge of what Imperial scholars would call the warp. The absence of Ethereal oversight allowed these investigations to proceed without the usual restrictions that might have been imposed on such potentially dangerous knowledge. Farsight noted this fact with growing unease, recalling how the Ethereals had always carefully controlled information about certain aspects of the universe, particularly those related to what they termed dimensional anomalies, phenomena that, he now suspected, were manifestations of the immaterium. As the research continued, Farsight began to experience unusual dreams. Unlike the disturbing hallucinations reported by others exposed to the Dawn Blade, these dreams carried a clarity and coherence that suggested something more than random neural activity. He saw vast armies clashing across burning worlds, creatures of impossible anatomy tearing through reality, and civilizations rising and falling in cycles of creation and destruction. Most troublingly, he occasionally glimpsed pale, robed figures directing the course of Tau history from shadows, their features obscured but their influence unmistakable. The breakthrough came when an Earth caste archaeologist discovered a hidden chamber beneath the central ruins. Unlike the grand, imposing architecture above, this space was austere and functional, a data repository of sorts, containing crystalline structures that the research team eventually determined were information storage devices. After weeks of careful analysis, they managed to extract fragmentary data, including visual records that appeared to document the fall of the civilization that had once inhabited Artha's Moloch. These records showed a technologically advanced species that had achieved mastery over both physical and psychic realms. Their downfall came not from external invasion, but from within. Entities they had contacted through psychic means gradually corrupted their leaders, eventually leading to societal collapse and the manifestation of the warp entities that Farsight's team had encountered. The final recordings showed desperate attempts to seal away knowledge of these entities and the creation of weapons, including the Dawn Blade, designed to combat them. Most significant for Farsight were the references to a phenomenon the ancient records termed the Great Devourer, entities that fed on psychic energy and could manipulate the thoughts and behaviors of entire species. The descriptions matched nothing in Tau experience, but aligned disturbingly well with certain aspects of ethereal influence over Tau society. This correlation became impossible to ignore when Farsight reviewed historical data concerning the emergence of the Ethereal caste. Tau historical records described the appearance of the first Ethereals during a period of civil war between the other castes. Their arrival had miraculously ended the conflict, with all Tau immediately recognizing their authority and accepting their guidance toward the philosophy of the greater good. This sudden, inexplicable acceptance had never been questioned in official histories, a fact that now struck Farsight as profoundly suspicious. Further investigation revealed subtle neurological changes in Tau physiology when in the presence of Ethereals, changes documented but classified by Earth caste medical researchers. These changes affected brain regions associated with decision-making, emotional regulation, and threat assessment. In essence, proximity to Ethereals induced a mild but significant state of enhanced suggestibility and reduced aggression in other Tau. The implications were staggering. If the Ethereals possessed some biological mechanism for influencing Tau behavior, the entire foundation of the greater good philosophy came into question. Were Tau following this path through reasoned choice or through subtle manipulation? The question haunted Farsight as he compared his own mental clarity since the death of the expedition's Ethereals with his previous unquestioning acceptance of their authority. This revelation coincided with the translation of additional fragments from the ancient data repository, including references to entities in the warp that the records called the Four, malevolent intelligences that sought to corrupt and consume all sentient life. The descriptions matched reports Farsight had personally gathered from human prisoners during the Damocles Crusade, accounts of chaos gods that imperial authorities considered the greatest threat to humanity. These accounts had been dismissed by ethereal advisors as human superstition, unworthy of serious consideration. The convergence of these discoveries, the nature of the Dawn Blade, the history of Artha's Moloch, the biological influence of the Ethereals, and the reality of warp entities, forced Farsight to reconsider everything he had been taught about the universe and the Tau place within it. The greater good, rather than an inevitable philosophical endpoint for all rational species, might instead be a mechanism of control, its true purpose obscured even from those who implemented it. This period of revelation coincided with increasing pressure from the Tau Empire for the expedition to return. Messages from the Ethereal Supreme, arriving months after being sent, grew increasingly imperative, citing threats to the empire that required Farsight's military expertise. These communications made no mention of the colonies established by the expedition, effectively abandoning thousands of Tau settlers to maintain the empire's core worlds. Farsight faced a critical decision. Returning would mean surrendering his newfound knowledge to Ethereal censorship and potentially abandoning the colonists who had followed him into uncharted space. Remaining independent would constitute unprecedented defiance of Ethereal authority, effectively rebellion against the established order of Tau society. The commander spent several days in isolation, reviewing all available data and considering the implications of each possible course of action. He consulted with trusted advisors from each caste, though without revealing the full extent of his discoveries regarding Ethereal influence. The consensus among these advisors favored maintaining the colonies while sending a portion of their military forces back to assist the Empire, a compromise that Farsight knew would be rejected by the Ethereal Supreme. The decision crystallized when Earth caste researchers completed their analysis of the Dawn Blade's effects on Farsight's physiology. The weapon had indeed extended his lifespan significantly, potentially granting him centuries of life beyond the normal Tau span. This unexpected longevity meant he could provide continuity of leadership for the colonies through multiple generations, a unique advantage that seemed almost purposeful, as though the Blade had chosen him specifically for this role. In the 8th month following the discovery of the Dawn Blade, Farsight formally announced his decision to the Expedition Council. The colonies would remain independent, maintaining their commitment to the philosophical ideals of the greater good while rejecting direct ethereal control. Military forces would be consolidated to defend these territories rather than returning to the Empire. Any colonists who wished to return would be provided transportation, but Farsight made clear his belief that their future lay in self-determination rather than continued submission to distant authority. The announcement created immediate division among the expedition members. While most fire caste warriors, particularly those who had fought alongside Farsight during the Damocles Crusade and subsequent campaigns, supported his decision, significant portions of the other castes expressed concern or outright opposition. Water caste diplomats, trained to uphold traditional Tau social structures, found the concept of rejecting ethereal leadership particularly difficult to accept. Farsight addressed these concerns directly, presenting carefully selected evidence of ethereal biological influence without revealing the full extent of what he had discovered about warp entities and their potential connection to Tau leadership. He emphasized practical considerations, the vulnerability of isolated colonies if their defensive forces were withdrawn, the Empire's apparent willingness to abandon colonists, and the opportunity to develop new social structures better adapted to their unique circumstances. Over the following weeks, approximately 20% of the expedition members chose to return to the Empire. Farsight provided them with sufficient vessels and supplies for the journey, along with formal communications explaining his decision in terms that avoided direct accusation of ethereal manipulation. These returning Tau would eventually reach the Empire and deliver Farsight's message, triggering the formal declaration of his forces as renegades, the beginning of what Empire historians would call the Farsight Rebellion. Those who remained, the vast majority of fire caste warriors and a substantial portion of the other castes, began the process of reorganizing their society without ethereal guidance. Farsight established a new governmental structure based on a council of representatives from all castes, with decisions made through reasoned debate rather than deference to ethereal wisdom. Military matters remained under his direct authority, but civilian governance was distributed among qualified administrators from various backgrounds. This new society, soon to become known as the Farsight Enclaves, developed a modified version of the greater good philosophy. While maintaining the core principle of collective welfare over individual gain, it emphasized informed consent and rational choice rather than unquestioning acceptance of authority. The castes remained as functional divisions of labor, but the rigid boundaries between them became more permeable, with individuals permitted to contribute according to their abilities regardless of birth caste. The most significant philosophical departure came in the Enclave's approach to other species. Where the Empire's version of the greater good assumed the eventual incorporation of all sentient beings under Tau leadership, Farsight's doctrine acknowledged the fundamental incompatibility of certain species and the right of others to maintain their cultural independence while cooperating on matters of mutual interest. This pragmatic approach, informed by Farsight's combat experience against orcs and his diplomatic interactions with human colonies, represented a fundamental break with traditional Tau expansionism. Militarily, the Farsight Enclaves developed doctrines that diverged significantly from Empire standards. Crisis battlesuit tactics emphasized close engagement and adaptive battlefield decision-making rather than rigid adherence to pre-established plans. Auxiliary forces were integrated more fully into Tau formations, with non-Tau combatants given greater autonomy and responsibility. Most controversially, Farsight established dedicated research into warp-related phenomena, seeking to understand and counter threats that the Empire officially denied existed. The Dawn Blade remained central to Farsight's personal combat doctrine. Though he understood its morally ambiguous nature, he recognized its effectiveness against both conventional enemies and warp entities. Under his direction, Earth caste engineers developed modified battlesuit configurations specifically designed to accommodate the blade's unusual properties, creating the distinctive Commander variant that would become his trademark. These modifications included enhanced cutting edges on the battlesuit's shield generators, allowing them to channel the blade's energy for defensive purposes. As the Enclaves consolidated their position, establishing defensive perimeters around their core worlds, and developing self-sufficient economic systems, Farsight continued his private research into the nature of the warp and its relationship to Tau history. Working with a small team of trusted Earth caste scientists, he systematically analyzed historical records, comparing them with the fragments recovered from Arthas Moloch and information gleaned from other sources, including captured Imperial texts. This research led to a disturbing hypothesis. The Ethereals might not be consciously malevolent manipulators, but rather unwitting vectors for subtle warp influence. Their biological ability to influence other Tau, combined with their genuine belief in the greater good, made them perfect conduits for entities seeking to shape Tau civilization toward unknown ends. This theory explained the Ethereals' consistent suppression of information about the warp. They themselves might be programmed to avoid conscious recognition of the forces working through them. The philosophical implications of this hypothesis formed the foundation of what would become known as the Farsight divergence, the belief that true service to the greater good required awareness of all threats, including those the Ethereals refused to acknowledge. By rejecting ethereal authority while maintaining commitment to the welfare of all Tau, Farsight positioned his Enclaves not as rebels against the greater good, but as its true defenders, protecting it from corrupting influences its traditional leaders could not recognize. The establishment of the Farsight Enclaves represented a radical departure from traditional Tau governance. Following his decision to remain independent from ethereal control, Commander Farsight focused on consolidating the territories his expedition had claimed beyond the Damocles Gulf. Unlike the commonly misunderstood notion that the Enclaves consisted of exactly 8 worlds, Farsight's domain encompassed a more complex stellar topography. At the heart of the Enclaves lay the system containing Arthas Moloch, though the planet itself remained largely uninhabited, except for research and military installations studying the ancient ruins. Surrounding this central system were 3 primary colony clusters, each containing multiple habitable worlds and moons. The northernmost cluster, centered around the planet designated Viorlos, became the primary military coordination center for the Enclaves. Its harsh climate and rugged terrain reminded many Viorla natives of their home sept, making it a natural gathering point for fire caste warriors loyal to Farsight. The eastern cluster, anchored by the temperate world Sassilos, developed into the agricultural and industrial backbone of the Enclaves. Earth caste engineers established extensive manufacturing complexes on its 2 habitable moons, while the main planet's fertile plains were transformed into highly efficient agricultural zones, producing sustenance for the entire enclave population. The southern cluster, comprising the twin worlds of Taun and Delith, became the administrative and cultural center of Farsight's domain. Water caste administrators established their headquarters on Delith, coordinating diplomatic relations between the various colonies and managing interactions with the few non-Tiao species that had been incorporated into the enclaves. Taun, with its extensive natural harbor systems and island archipelagos, developed into a center for air caste operations, with massive shipyards constructing and maintaining the enclave fleet. Between these major clusters lay numerous smaller colonies, mining outposts, and military installations, creating a network of Tau presence spanning approximately 20 light-years. Natural barriers, including dense asteroid fields and radiation zones, provided some protection against external threats, though Farsight never relied solely on these natural defenses. The political structure that emerged in the enclaves differed dramatically from the Ethereal-led hierarchy of the Tau Empire. In place of the spiritual authority wielded by the Ethereal caste, Farsight established a council of high commanders, comprising representatives from all 4 remaining castes. Each major colony sent delegates to this council, which met quarterly on rotating worlds to prevent any single location from becoming too dominant in enclave politics. Day-to-day governance operated through a system of functional administrators rather than caste-based authority. While individuals generally performed roles aligned with their traditional caste specializations, the rigid boundaries between castes gradually softened. Fire caste warriors with aptitude for logistics might serve in supply coordination roles typically reserved for Earth caste, while particularly diplomatic Earth caste members could represent their colonies in negotiations normally handled by Water caste. This flexibility represented perhaps the most radical departure from Empire traditions, where caste boundaries were considered almost sacred. In the enclaves, practical effectiveness gradually superseded traditional role assignments, though the basic specializations remained as guiding principles rather than absolute restrictions. Military organization within the enclaves evolved to reflect both Farsight's personal tactical preferences and the practical realities of their isolated position. Without access to the Empire's extensive production facilities and recruitment pools, enclave forces emphasized quality over quantity, with each warrior receiving more extensive training and better equipment than their Empire counterparts. The core of enclave military power resided in its crisis battlesuit cadres. Farsight devoted significant resources to battlesuit production and pilot training, creating formations capable of rapid deployment and adaptation to changing battlefield conditions. These elite units typically operated in teams of 3 to 5 suits, each team specialized for specific tactical roles, but cross-trained to perform effectively in multiple combat scenarios. Supporting these crisis teams were conventional fire warrior squads organized into highly mobile strike forces. Unlike Empire doctrine, which often deployed fire warriors in static defensive positions, enclave tactics emphasized aggressive maneuver warfare, with infantry units trained to rapidly secure objectives before crisis teams arrived to provide heavy support. Perhaps most distinctive was Farsight's development of close combat capabilities, traditionally underemphasized in Tau military doctrine. Inspired by his experiences with the Dawn Blade, Enclave engineers modified certain battlesuit variants to mount short-range energy blades and enhance shield generators capable of deflecting melee attacks. These modifications, while considered heretical by Empire military theorists, proved highly effective against enemies who expected Tau forces to crumble in close quarters. The absence of Ethereals necessitated significant cultural adaptations within Enclave society. Without the natural calming influence Ethereals exerted on other Tau, Farsight implemented alternative methods for maintaining social cohesion and resolving disputes. Meditation practices derived from fire caste warrior traditions were adapted for civilian use, helping individuals maintain emotional balance and focus on collective goals without ethereal guidance. Education systems underwent substantial revision, with greater emphasis placed on critical thinking and independent decision-making rather than rote acceptance of established wisdom. Young Tao were encouraged to question assumptions and propose alternative approaches to problems, attitudes that would have been subtly discouraged under ethereal oversight. This educational philosophy produced a generation of enclave citizens with notably different psychological profiles from their empire counterparts, more individually assertive but no less committed to collective welfare. The philosophical concept of the greater good remained central to enclave culture, but its interpretation evolved significantly. Where empire teachings presented the greater good as an absolute truth revealed through ethereal wisdom, enclave philosophers reframed it as an aspirational principle to be continuously examined and refined through rational discourse. The emphasis shifted from obedience to authority toward informed consent and collective deliberation. This philosophical evolution manifested most clearly in the enclave's approach to other species. Unlike the Empire's assumption that all sentient beings would eventually accept incorporation into the greater good under Tao leadership, Enclave doctrine recognized fundamental incompatibilities between certain species and acknowledged the right of others to maintain cultural independence while cooperating on matters of mutual interest. Human colonies within Enclave territory experienced this difference directly. Rather than facing the subtle pressures toward cultural assimilation characteristic of empire expansion, these communities entered into pragmatic alliances based on mutual defense and technological exchange. Humans served alongside Tao in military formations, but maintained their own cultural practices and governance structures, creating a relationship more akin to confederation than incorporation. The defensive strategies employed by the Farsight Enclaves reflected both their limited resources and their leader's tactical genius. Understanding that his forces could never match the raw numbers of potential adversaries like the Imperium or the Tao Empire, Farsight implemented a defense-in-depth approach utilizing both conventional and unconventional methods. The outer perimeter of Enclave space was monitored by a network of automated sensor platforms and small, stealthed observation satellites. These systems provided early warning of approaching threats while gathering intelligence on enemy fleet compositions and potential vectors of attack. Rather than attempting to defend this entire perimeter, an impossible task given available resources, Farsight established rapid response forces at strategic junctions, capable of quickly reinforcing threatened sectors. The middle defensive layer comprised dedicated combat stations and minefields positioned along likely approach corridors. These defenses were designed not to stop determined attackers, but to channel them toward prepared engagement zones where Enclave forces could fight on advantageous terms. Automated drone swarms supplemented these fixed defenses, harassing enemy formations and gathering tactical data for command analysis. The inner defensive layer, protecting core colony worlds, featured the most sophisticated technologies available to the Enclaves. Planetary defense systems included both conventional weapons platforms and experimental technologies developed by Earth caste researchers free from ethereal restrictions. Particularly notable were the prototype EMP cannons capable of temporarily disabling electronic systems in orbital vessels, forcing attackers to commit to atmospheric entry without functioning guidance systems. Complementing these layered defenses was Farsight's signature approach to fleet deployment. Rather than concentrating naval assets in large battle groups, Enclave vessels operated in small, highly mobile squadrons, capable of rapidly converging when needed, but difficult to track and engage when dispersed. This distributed fleet strategy maximized the effectiveness of limited ship numbers while complicating enemy targeting priorities. The most innovative aspect of Enclave defense strategy involved psychological operations against potential aggressors. Water caste specialists, drawing on extensive intelligence data, crafted targeted information campaigns designed to exaggerate Enclave military capabilities and exploit known fears or biases within enemy command structures. These operations sometimes prevented conflicts entirely, by convincing potential attackers that the expected gains would not justify the projected costs. When diplomatic deterrence failed, the Enclaves employed unconventional warfare tactics to offset numerical disadvantages. Stealth teams would infiltrate enemy territory before formal hostilities began, identifying critical infrastructure and command nodes for precision strikes once conflict erupted. Caste engineers developed sophisticated electronic warfare systems capable of disrupting enemy communications and targeting systems, creating confusion that Enclave forces could exploit. Perhaps the most significant defensive advantage the Enclaves possessed was Farsight himself. His centuries of combat experience, enhanced by the life-extending properties of the Dawn Blade, provided strategic continuity that neither the Imperium nor the Tau Empire could match. While other military organizations experienced regular leadership turnover due to natural lifespans or political shifts, Farsight remained a constant presence, accumulating knowledge of enemy tactics and refining countermeasures across decades. This longevity created unique challenges for Enclave social structures. As the founding generation of colonists aged and died while their leader remained vital, Farsight had to navigate complex questions of succession planning and institutional memory. He addressed these issues by establishing the Eight, a council of his most trusted commanders who shared his strategic vision and could implement it independently when necessary. Though the specific members of the Eight changed over time as age claimed even the most dedicated warriors, the institution provided essential continuity of command philosophy. The relationship between the Farsight Enclaves and the Tau Empire evolved from initial hostility toward a complex détente. Following Farsight's declaration of independence, the Ethereal Supreme dispatched several punitive expeditions to bring the renegade commander to justice. These forces, expecting to face disorganized rebels, instead encountered sophisticated defensive networks and highly motivated warriors fighting on familiar terrain under experienced leadership. After several costly failures to reclaim the Enclave territories, Empire policy shifted toward containment rather than reconquest. A substantial military presence was maintained along the border regions, ostensibly to prevent further expansion, but practically serving more as a quarantine to prevent Farsight's dangerous ideas from spreading to Empire citizens. Caste propagandists within the Empire portrayed Farsight alternately as a tragic figure led astray by battle trauma or a dangerous radical undermining the foundations of Tau society. Within the Enclaves, attitudes toward the Empire remained complex. Many colonists, particularly those born after the separation, viewed Empire Tau as unfortunate victims of ethereal manipulation rather than enemies. Educational materials accurately described Empire achievements and contributions to Tau civilization, while also explaining the philosophical differences that necessitated separation. This nuanced approach prevented the development of simplistic hatred while maintaining clear awareness of the genuine threats Empire forces might pose. The formation of Farsight's elite cadre known as the Eight represented the culmination of his military philosophy and leadership approach. Far more than a simple battlesuit team, this legendary group served as both the supreme military command and the governing council of the Farsight Enclaves, each member bringing unique tactical expertise and specialized equipment to form a cohesive whole greater than the sum of its parts. Commander Farsight began assembling this inner circle approximately 30 years after the establishment of the Enclaves. As the original expedition members aged, while he remained vital due to the Dawn Blade's life-extending properties, Farsight recognized the need for a leadership structure that could maintain continuity of his vision while adapting to new challenges. He selected warriors not merely for their combat prowess, but for their strategic minds, unwavering loyalty, and ability to function independently when necessary. At the heart of the Eight stood Commander Farsight himself, piloting his signature XV-85 Crisis battlesuit, modified with enhanced shield generators and specialized mounting brackets for the Dawn Blade. The ancient weapon's supernatural properties complemented Farsight's aggressive combat style, allowing him to engage enemies at ranges most Tau commanders would consider suicidal. His battlesuit featured a distinctive red color scheme that became the unofficial heraldry of the Enclaves, with white and gold accents marking his status as Supreme Commander. Beside Farsight stood Commander Brightsword, a fiery young officer from the second generation of Enclave citizens. Born on Viorlos and raised on tales of Farsight's exploits, Brightsword embodied the more aggressive aspects of Enclave military doctrine. His XV-8 Crisis battlesuit carried twin fusion blades, advanced energy weapons developed by Enclave Earth caste engineers based on principles derived from studying the Dawn Blade. These weapons, while lacking the supernatural properties of Farsight's ancient artifact, could still slice through tank armor with ease, making Brightsword a devastating close-quarters combatant. Brightsword's tactical role within the Eight focused on shock assault and target elimination. When enemy command units or specialized threats were identified, Brightsword would lead the initial strike, using his battlesuit's superior mobility to bypass defensive screens and engage priority targets directly. His impetuous nature sometimes led to tactical disagreements with Farsight, but these tensions ultimately strengthened the Eight's command dynamics, forcing continuous reassessment of operational doctrine. Commander Bravestorm represented a different aspect of Enclave military philosophy. A veteran of the original expedition, and one of the few survivors of the Damocles Gulf Crusade still serving in a combat role, Bravestorm piloted a heavily modified XV-85 Enforcer Crisis battlesuit equipped with an experimental shield generator. This device, significantly more powerful than standard Tau defensive technology, could temporarily redirect the energy of incoming attacks back toward their source, creating a momentary window of invulnerability. Bravestorm's defensive specialization complemented Brightsword's aggressive approach, allowing the Eight to implement complex tactical maneuvers that balanced risk and protection. In typical engagements, Bravestorm would position himself to draw enemy fire, his enhanced shields absorbing punishment while his teammates exploited the openings created. Despite his protective role, Bravestorm was no mere sentinel. His battlesuit mounted a heavy burst cannon and plasma rifle combination that delivered punishing firepower when needed. The technological sophistication of the Eight extended beyond modified crisis suits. Sub-Commander Torchstar piloted a XV-15 stealth suit equipped with an advanced holographic field generator that could project multiple decoy images, confusing enemy targeting systems and creating opportunities for precision strikes. As the infiltration specialist of the Eight, Torchstar typically deployed ahead of the main force, gathering intelligence and eliminating key targets before the primary engagement began. Torchstar's relationship with Farsight was particularly close, their tactical philosophies aligned through decades of shared combat experience. Where other members of the Eight might occasionally question Farsight's decisions, Torchstar implemented his directives with intuitive understanding, often anticipating his strategic intentions before they were explicitly stated. This synergy made her an invaluable component of the Eight's command structure, serving as Farsight's eyes and ears across the battlefield. The ranged combat specialist of the Eight, Commander Arakan, operated a modified XV-88 broadside battlesuit featuring twin heavy rail rifles and a seeker missile array. This loadout gave him unparalleled long-range killing power, capable of engaging targets beyond the effective range of most enemy weapons. Arakan's tactical role focused on fire support and area denial, his devastating railgun shots eliminating heavily armored threats, while his seeker missiles suppressed infantry concentrations. Unlike most broadside pilots who remained in fixed firing positions, Arakan employed unusually mobile tactics, constantly repositioning to maintain optimal firing angles while avoiding counter-battery fire. This approach required exceptional situational awareness and split-second timing, qualities Arakan had honed through countless engagements against Imperial, Orc, and even Tau Empire forces. His methodical nature balanced the more impulsive tendencies of teammates like Brightsword, creating a more measured overall approach to combat operations. The most technologically sophisticated member of the Eight was indisputably Oblatai 90, an artificial intelligence core housed within a modified XV-85 Enforcer battlesuit. Originally Shasso Oblatai, a brilliant commander who suffered fatal injuries during an engagement with Dark Eldar raiders, his consciousness was partially preserved through experimental Earth caste technology. The resulting AI retained Oblatai's tactical genius and combat experience, while gaining the ability to process battlefield data at speeds no organic mind could match. Oblatai 9's battlesuit featured an unprecedented array of sensor systems and data processing units, allowing real-time analysis of complex battlefield conditions. In practical terms, this meant the 8 always operated with perfect information about enemy positions, movement patterns, and weapons capabilities within Oblatai's sensor range. This intelligence advantage proved decisive in countless engagements, allowing the 8 to anticipate enemy maneuvers and counter them before they developed. The ethical implications of Oblatai's existence represented one of the many ways the Enclaves diverged from Empire orthodoxy. Traditional Tau doctrine maintained clear separation between AI systems and sentient decision-making, fearing the potential for machine logic to subvert the greater good through cold calculation. Farsight's willingness to incorporate an AI commander into his inner circle demonstrated his pragmatic approach to technology, evaluating tools based on their practical utility rather than ideological constraints. Rounding out the 8's core combat capabilities was Commander Shavastos, pilot of a XV-9 Hazard Close Support battlesuit equipped with twin double-barreled burst cannons. This specialized suit, rarely seen even within the technologically innovative Enclaves, excelled at area suppression and close-range firefights. Shavastos typically deployed as the 8's anvil, laying down withering hails of pulse fire to fix enemy formations in place while his teammates maneuvered for killing blows. Shavastos brought more than firepower to the 8. His background as an Earth caste engineer, before transferring to combat roles, gave him unique insight into technological vulnerabilities and opportunities. During mission planning, Shavastos often identified critical infrastructure targets whose destruction would disproportionately impact enemy capabilities. This technical expertise complemented Farsight's tactical genius, adding another dimension to the 8's operational flexibility. The final member of this elite cadre, Honor Guard Donar, represented a living link to Farsight's past. One of the original Viorla fire warriors who had served under Oshawa during the Damocles Gulf Crusade, Donar declined battlesuit training despite numerous opportunities, preferring to fight as a traditional fire warrior. His modified XV-25 stealth suit, lighter and more agile than the heavier Crisis variants, allowed him to deploy as an advanced scout and precision shooter, eliminating enemy sentries and creating infiltration corridors for the main force. Donar's presence in the 8 served purposes beyond his considerable combat skills. As a veteran of Farsight's earliest campaigns, he provided historical perspective and institutional memory, reminding younger members of the principles that had guided the formation of the Enclaves. His unwavering loyalty to Farsight personally, rather than abstract ideals or political structures, exemplified the bond between the commander and his original followers, a relationship based on shared experience and proven trust rather than ideological alignment or caste obligation. The 8 functioned as more than a battlefield unit. They formed the effective governing council of the Farsight Enclaves. Each member took responsibility for specific aspects of Enclave administration and defense, leveraging their particular expertise to address the complex challenges facing their isolated society. Regular council meetings, typically held in a fortified command center beneath Viorlos's primary military academy, allowed for comprehensive strategic planning and policy coordination across all Enclave territories. This governance structure evolved naturally from the Enclave's military origins, but developed sophisticated administrative capabilities over time. Torchstar, with her background in covert operations, oversaw intelligence gathering and counter-espionage efforts, maintaining surveillance networks that identified potential threats before they materialized. Arakan managed the Enclave's defensive infrastructure, continuously updating orbital defense platforms and ground-based weapon emplacements to counter evolving enemy capabilities. Oblatai 9's computational capacity, made him the natural choice for coordinating logistical operations across the enclaves, optimizing resource allocation and production priorities to maintain maximum military readiness while supporting civilian needs. Shavastos directed research and development initiatives, leveraging his Earth caste background to push technological boundaries without the conservative constraints imposed by ethereal oversight in the Empire. Bravestorm took responsibility for diplomatic relations with the few external entities the enclaves engaged with, including independent human settlements and certain Kroot kindreds that maintain neutrality in the ongoing tension between the enclaves and the Empire. His patient, measured approach made him effective in negotiations where Brightsword's aggressive tendencies might have created unnecessary friction. The personal relationships between members of the Eight reflected decades of shared combat experience and the unique pressures of leading an isolated society surrounded by potential enemies. Farsight maintained professional distance appropriate to his command role, but allowed himself moments of camaraderie during private council sessions, particularly with veterans like Bravestorm and Donar, who had known him since before the expedition. Brightsword and Torchstar developed a competitive dynamic that pushed both to greater achievements. Their contrasting approaches to combat, direct assault versus stealth and misdirection, creating natural tension that Farsight skillfully channeled into tactical innovation. Oblatai 9-0 and Shavastos formed an effective partnership focused on technological development, the AI's computational modeling capabilities complementing the former Earth caste engineers' practical experience. The Eight trained together constantly, developing synchronized combat techniques that maximized their complementary capabilities. These exercises took place in specialized facilities beneath Viorlos's surface, where advanced holographic projectors created realistic simulations of potential adversaries. Particular emphasis was placed on countering Space Marine tactics, Tyranid adaptation strategies, and the orthodox Tau Empire formations they might face if the uneasy standoff along their borders erupted into open conflict. These training regimens produced an unprecedented level of tactical coordination. In actual combat operations, the Eight could execute complex maneuvers with minimal verbal communication, each member anticipating their teammates' actions through familiarity and shared doctrinal understanding. When facing particularly dangerous opponents, they would implement pre-planned combination attacks designated by simple code phrases, unleashing precisely coordinated firepower or executing elaborate flanking maneuvers that overwhelmed even numerically superior enemies. Beyond their military effectiveness, the Eight symbolized the core values of the Farsight Enclaves: adaptability, technological innovation, and rejection of dogmatic constraints. Each member had, in their own way, transcended traditional Tau limitations, whether through Brightsword's embrace of close combat, Oblatai's existence as an AI commander, or Donar's deliberate choice to maintain fire warrior traditions while serving alongside battlesuit elites. For the citizens of the Enclaves, the Eight represented living proof that their society could thrive without ethereal guidance. When they appeared at public ceremonies or military reviews, their distinctive battlesuits instantly recognizable to even the youngest Tau, they embodied the Enclave's successful defiance of Empire orthodoxy. Stories of their exploits, carefully documented and shared through educational networks, reinforced the founding principles of Farsight's breakaway state, while inspiring new generations of fire warriors to uphold those principles. The Eight's significance extended beyond the Enclave's borders. Within the Tau Empire, their existence represented a dangerous alternative to ethereal rule, proof that Tau society could function and even thrive without the caste that had guided them since the earliest days of their civilization. Empire propagandists worked diligently to counter this implicit threat, portraying the Eight as misguided renegades whose apparent success masked inevitable decay and eventual collapse without proper spiritual guidance. To Imperial observers who managed to gather intelligence on Enclave operations, the Eight presented a troubling evolution of Tau military capabilities. The close combat proficiency demonstrated by Farsight and Brightsword contradicted established Imperial understanding of Tau tactical limitations, forcing costly revisions to engagement protocols. Reports of the Eight's battlefield performance contributed to the Imperium's decision to maintain the uneasy ceasefire established after the Damocles Gulf Crusade, recognizing that the cost of eliminating this pocket of Xeno's resistance would be disproportionate to any strategic gain. The Third Sphere expansion marked a critical period in the complex relationship between the Farsight Enclaves and the Tau Empire. Following the discovery of the Stardite Nexus, a network of stable warp corridors created during the Empire's catastrophic Fourth Sphere expansion attempt, the Tau suddenly gained access to vast new territories. This unexpected development forced both Farsight and the Ethereal leadership to reassess their positions in the wider galactic conflict. Commander Farsight observed these developments with strategic caution. His intelligence networks, primarily maintained by Torchstar's covert operatives, provided detailed reports of Empire fleet movements and colonization patterns. The speed and scale of the Third Sphere expansion concerned him. The Tau Empire was stretching its resources across unprecedented distances, potentially creating vulnerabilities that more experienced galactic powers would inevitably exploit. The Ethereal Supreme Council, while publicly maintaining their position that Farsight remained a renegade to be brought back into compliance, pragmatically recognized that military confrontation with the Enclaves would be counterproductive while facing challenges on multiple expansion fronts. This mutual recognition of priorities created an unofficial détente, with direct conflict between Empire and Enclave forces becoming increasingly rare despite their ideological differences. This tacit understanding was first tested when Tyranid splinter fleets from Hive Fleet Gorgon began probing the outer reaches of both Tau territories in the 975th year of the 41st millennium. Initial contact with these Xenos organisms proved catastrophic for isolated Tau colonies, with several frontier worlds falling before effective countermeasures could be deployed. The Tyranid adaptation rate outpaced conventional Tau tactical responses, creating a crisis that threatened both the Empire and the Enclaves. Farsight's response demonstrated both his tactical brilliance and pragmatic approach to survival. Rather than exploiting the Empire's vulnerability, he dispatched a secure communication to the Ethereal Supreme Council, offering tactical data his forces had gathered on Tyranid adaptation patterns. This information, compiled by Oblatine 90's advanced analysis systems, included specific weaknesses identified in Tyranid biomorphs and recommended countermeasures that had proven effective in Enclave defensive operations. The Ethereal Council, after brief deliberation, accepted this intelligence while publicly claiming it had been gathered by their own water caste operatives. This face-saving measure allowed Empire commanders to implement Farsight's tactics without acknowledging cooperation with the renegade forces. The effectiveness of these shared strategies became apparent within months, as Tau casualties against Tyranid forces decreased significantly on both sides of the political divide. This pattern of unacknowledged cooperation continued as the Tyranid threat intensified. When a major Tyranid splinter fleet threatened the Empire-sept world of Viortal, Farsight made the unprecedented decision to deploy the Eight directly into Empire territory. Their arrival, timed to coincide with a critical phase of the battle, provided crucial reinforcement to the beleaguered Empire defenders. The sight of Farsight's distinctive red battlesuit leading a precision strike against Tyranid synapse creatures created momentary confusion among Empire forces, but tactical necessity quickly overcame political considerations. Empire fire warriors found themselves fighting alongside Enclave veterans, their combined firepower stemming the Tyranid advance long enough for additional Empire reinforcements to arrive from neighboring systems. In the battle's aftermath, Empire water caste propagandists described the engagement as a heroic last stand by loyal sept defenders, making no mention of Enclave assistance. Privately, however, the Ethereal overseeing the defense of Viortal sent a coded acknowledgement to Farsight, recognizing the debt owed while maintaining official distance. This subtle shift in relations, cooperation without recognition, established a template that would define Empire-Enclave interactions throughout the Third Sphere expansion. The pragmatic alliance against Tyranid incursions soon extended to other threats. When Orkwog Graktooth threatened to overwhelm the Kelshan Sept, Farsight again deployed forces to assist Empire defenders. The Orcs, expecting conventional Tau tactics focused on long-range engagement, were unprepared for the close assault capabilities of Brightsword's Fusion Blade-equipped crisis teams. This unexpected combat doctrine disrupted the Orc advance, creating tactical opportunities that Empire commanders quickly exploited. The cooperation against common enemies extended beyond military operations to include intelligence sharing and technological exchange, albeit through carefully deniable channels. Earth-caste scientists from the Empire would occasionally defect to the Enclaves, bringing experimental technologies for testing free from Ethereal oversight, only to escape months later with refined designs based on Enclave improvements. These technological exchanges accelerated Tau weapons development on both sides, particularly in the fields of battlesuit systems and anti-warp countermeasures. Despite these pragmatic collaborations, fundamental philosophical differences remained. When the Damocles Gulf region became accessible again, following the recession of the Imperium's Great Warp Storm, known as the Noctis Eterna, both the Empire and the Enclaves moved to reclaim territories lost during the original Imperial Crusade. Their approaches, however, differed dramatically. Empire forces, led by Commander Shadowsun, implemented traditional Tau expansion protocols, establishing colony bases supported by water caste diplomatic missions tasked with bringing human populations into the greater good through persuasion backed by military pressure. Farsight's approach in territories claimed by the Enclaves focused instead on establishing mutual defense pacts with human settlements, offering technological assistance and protection in exchange for resource access and strategic cooperation without cultural assimilation. These contrasting methodologies came into direct conflict on the contested world of Atari Vo. Originally a minor agricultural colony of the Imperium, the planet had been cut off from Imperial support for decades, developing an independent governance structure that maintained some Imperial traditions while abandoning others. Both Empire and Enclave forces arrived nearly simultaneously, each seeking to secure the world's strategic position and substantial agricultural output. Rather than engaging in direct conflict, representatives from both Tau factions presented their cases to the Human Leadership Council. The Empire Water caste diplomats offered full integration into the greater good, with the technological and social benefits that entailed, alongside subtle implications of consequences should this generous offer be rejected. Farsight's representatives, led by Bravestorm, proposed a limited alliance that would preserve human cultural autonomy while providing defensive technology and limited Tau settlement rights. The Human Council, recognizing the opportunity presented by this competition, negotiated terms that combined elements of both proposals, accepting technological assistance and limited defensive presence from both Tau factions while maintaining their independence. This arrangement, unprecedented in Tau expansion history, created a buffer zone where Empire and Enclave influences coexisted in uneasy balance, neither side willing to risk open conflict that would likely drive the humans back toward Imperial allegiance. The Atari Vo arrangement became a template for similar accommodations across the reclaimed Damocles region, with human worlds playing Empire and Enclave interests against each other to maintain degrees of autonomy neither Tau faction would normally permit. Farsight recognized the pragmatic value of these arrangements, seeing them as stepping stones toward genuine cooperation based on mutual interest rather than coercion or assimilation. The Ethereal Council viewed them as temporary compromises, necessary concessions, while focusing resources on more significant expansion opportunities elsewhere. This period of complex cooperation and competition was disrupted in the year 999 of the 41st millennium, when the Imperium launched a massive counter-offensive into Tau space. The campaign, designated the Prefecture Campaign by Imperial strategists, targeted key Tau holdings with overwhelming force, including elements from multiple Space Marine chapters and significant Imperial Guard assets. The sudden intensity of this assault forced both the Empire and Enclaves to reassess their priorities, temporarily setting aside their differences to address this existential threat. Farsight's response to the Imperial offensive demonstrated his strategic foresight and understanding of human military doctrine. Rather than attempting to hold fixed positions against superior Imperial numbers, he implemented a defense-in-depth strategy that traded territory for time, drawing Imperial forces into overextended positions before launching precision counterattacks against their supply lines and command structures. The Eight played a crucial role in these operations, with Torchstar's stealth teams infiltrating Imperial command posts to gather intelligence, while Arakan's long-range fire support eliminated key Imperial officers identified through this intelligence. Brightsword led daring raids against Imperial armor concentrations, his fusion blades cutting through Land Raider armor with the same ease as the Dawn blade itself, while Oblatai 9's predictive algorithms identified optimal ambush positions with uncanny accuracy. These Enclave operations complemented the more conventional defensive actions of Empire forces, creating a synergy neither side officially acknowledged but both tactically exploited. When Imperial push came toward critical Empire manufacturing centers on Viortal, Farsight's forces appeared at crucial moments to relieve pressure on Empire defensive lines, allowing for orderly withdrawal rather than catastrophic collapse. Similarly, when Enclave mining operations on the moon of Kamais came under Space Marine assault, Empire stealth teams arrived unexpectedly to eliminate Imperial drop beacons, preventing reinforcement of the initial attack force. The most significant cooperation occurred during the Battle of Endraz, where a major Imperial battle group threatened a planet of immense cultural significance to all Tau. Once the first colony of the Second Sphere expansion, Endraz had been mysteriously abandoned centuries earlier, its cities left intact but completely devoid of inhabitants. For the Empire, the world represented a historical mystery and potential embarrassment. For Farsight, who had personally participated in its initial colonization, it held answers to questions about the Empire's past that might illuminate its future. When Imperial forces moved to claim Endraz, both Farsight and the Empire commander Shadowsun independently deployed forces to prevent this outcome. Their arrival in the same theater created initial confusion, with both Tau forces maintaining separation while engaging the Imperial threat. As the battle intensified, however, tactical necessity forced coordination. Shadowsun's stealth tactics complemented Farsight's aggressive battlesuit drops, creating a combined arms approach that Imperial commanders struggled to counter effectively. The culmination of this unplanned cooperation came when an Imperial Titan battle group threatened to overwhelm the Tau defensive position around Endraz's primary archaeological site. Farsight and Shadowsun, former students of the same master now divided by ideology, implemented a joint operation that reflected their shared tactical heritage. Shadowsun's stealth teams targeted the Titan's sensor arrays and weapon control systems, creating vulnerabilities that Farsight's crisis teams exploited with precision strikes against exposed power conduits and joint mechanisms. The successful defense of Endraz marked a turning point in Empire-Enclave relations. Though no formal acknowledgement occurred, the practical reality of their interdependence became impossible to ignore. In the aftermath, limited communication channels opened between Farsight's command structure and certain Empire military leaders, primarily focused on coordination against Imperial incursions, but occasionally extending to other mutual threats. This pragmatic cooperation faced its greatest test with the emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the great rift that split the galaxy following the fall of Cadia. The psychic shockwave of this catastrophic warp event affected Tau space less severely than many Imperial worlds, but still created unprecedented challenges. Warp storms isolated colonies, communication systems failed unpredictably, and on several worlds, the weakened barriers between real space and the immaterium allowed entities to manifest that Tau science struggled to explain or combat. Farsight, with his decades of research into warp phenomena and first-hand experience with the entities of Artha's Moloch, possessed unique insights into these threats that the Ethereal-controlled empire lacked. His forces had developed countermeasures against warp manifestations, including modified shield generators that disrupted the energy patterns of non-corporeal entities and specialized ammunition that could affect beings not fully materialized in real space. When a particularly severe warp incursion threatened the Empire-sept world of Falcia, home to crucial Earth caste research facilities, Farsight made the unprecedented decision to share his anti-warp technologies directly with Empire defenders. The transmission, sent through secure channels to the Fire Caste commander rather than Ethereal authorities, included detailed specifications for modifications to standard Tau equipment that would improve effectiveness against warp entities. The Empire commander, facing manifestations that conventional weapons could barely affect, implemented these modifications despite lacking Ethereal authorization. The effectiveness of these countermeasures proved decisive, allowing Tau defenders to repel entities that had previously seemed invulnerable. In the aftermath, the commander reported the successful defense while obscuring the source of the technological innovations that made it possible. This pattern repeated across Tau space as the effects of the Great Rift intensified. Farsight's understanding of warp threats, developed through decades of forbidden research, provided protection for Tau on both sides of the political divide. The Ethereal Council, while publicly maintaining that such entities were merely dimensional anomalies, explainable through rational science, privately permitted the implementation of enclave-developed countermeasures through carefully deniable channels. The cooperation extended to joint operations against the increasing chaos presence in the Eastern Fringe. When a warband of the Death Guard, led by the plague sorcerer Festerlord Graxus, attacked the Tau colony on Corvatra, forces from both the Empire and Enclaves responded. The Death Guard's plague weapons and demon engines presented unprecedented challenges for Tau defenders, with conventional tactics proving ineffective against enemies who ignored crippling wounds and spread contagion with every engagement. Farsight's experience with warp entities proved crucial in developing effective countermeasures. The 8 deployed directly to the most severely affected zones, with Shavastos' Flamer-equipped hazard suit proving particularly effective against the Plague Marine's diseased foot soldiers. Oblatai 9-0's analytical systems identified patterns in the seemingly random spread of contagion, allowing Tau defenders to establish containment zones that slowed the plague's advance. Empire forces, initially hesitant to coordinate directly with the Enclaves, gradually adapted their operations to complement Farsight's tactics. Shadowsun's stealth teams focused on eliminating the Death Guard's sorceress leaders, while conventional fire warrior cadres maintained containment perimeters around infected zones identified by Enclave intelligence. This unacknowledged cooperation eventually forced the Death Guard to withdraw, though not before significant portions of the colony had been rendered permanently uninhabitable by supernatural contagion. The aftermath of these joint operations created a new equilibrium between the Empire and Enclaves. While official policy continued to designate Farsight as a renegade to be eventually brought back to the greater good, practical military cooperation became increasingly common against threats that endangered all Tau. This pragmatic approach extended beyond immediate battlefield coordination to include limited technological exchange, intelligence sharing, and even occasional resource trading through neutral third parties. For Farsight, this arrangement represented a partial vindication of his position. The Empire's willingness to utilize his anti-warp technologies and tactical innovations demonstrated the practical value of his research into phenomena the Ethereals had long denied existed. At the same time, he recognized that full reconciliation remained impossible so long as the Ethereal caste maintained its control over Empire society and its unwillingness to acknowledge the true nature of the warp. Farsight's development of the Montka doctrine extended far beyond its original tactical applications. While the Tau Empire traditionally viewed Montka, the killing blow, as merely one approach within a broader strategic framework, Farsight gradually refined it into a comprehensive philosophical system that informed not only military operations, but governance, societal organization, and personal conduct throughout the enclaves. The origins of this philosophical evolution could be traced to Farsight's earliest experiences under Commander Pure Tide, where other students gravitated toward particular tactical doctrines, Shadowsun famously favoring the patient Koyan approach. Farsight recognized that Montka's emphasis on identifying critical vulnerabilities and applying decisive force could extend beyond immediate battlefield applications. During his campaigns against the Imperium and various Xenos threats, he observed how the principle of concentrated effect at optimal moments applied across strategic, operational, and tactical levels. Within traditional Tau military doctrine, Montka was primarily understood as a tactical approach emphasizing the rapid application of overwhelming firepower against an enemy's critical weakness. Empire commanders typically implemented this as straightforward hammer blow attacks, concentrating maximum firepower on identified targets before withdrawing to prepare for subsequent engagements. While effective against predictable opponents, this interpretation proved inadequate against the adaptive threats Farsight encountered beyond the Damocles Gulf. Farsight's refinement began with a fundamental reconsideration of what constituted a critical vulnerability. Where conventional doctrine focused almost exclusively on physical targets, command nodes, supply depots, heavy weapons platforms, Farsight expanded the concept to include psychological factors, temporal advantages, and environmental conditions. A critical vulnerability might be an enemy formation's morale at a specific moment, a temporary gap in sensor coverage, or even an opponent's overconfidence in a particular tactical approach. This broader understanding necessitated more sophisticated implementation. Rather than simple concentration of force, Farsight developed what became known as cascading Montka, a series of precisely timed smaller strikes designed to create compounding effects. Each action would expose or generate new vulnerabilities that subsequent actions could exploit, creating a tactical momentum that opponents struggled to counter. This approach proved particularly effective against Space Marines, whose rigid combat doctrines often left them vulnerable to unexpected shifts in engagement patterns. The most visible manifestation of Farsight's Montka philosophy emerged in his revolutionary approach to crisis battlesuit deployment. Traditional Tau doctrine positioned crisis suits as mobile fire support platforms, typically engaging from medium range to maximize the effectiveness of their weapon systems while minimizing exposure to enemy counter fire. Farsight inverted this approach, developing what became known as the Farsight Drop, a high-risk, high-reward tactic that placed crisis teams directly into close engagement range with enemy formations. The technique required extensive modifications to standard crisis suit systems and pilot training protocols. Thrusters were recalibrated for rapid deceleration, allowing suits to transition from high-speed approach to stable firing platform almost instantaneously. Targeting systems received enhanced short-range accuracy algorithms, sacrificing long-distance precision for split-second target acquisition in chaotic close-quarters environments. Most significantly, pilots underwent specialized psychological conditioning to overcome the instinctive Tau aversion to close combat, training them to maintain tactical awareness despite the sensory overload of point-blank engagement. The Farsight Drop fundamentally changed the battlefield role of crisis suits from support elements to shock assault units. Teams would deploy directly into enemy formations, often landing within meters of their targets. This extreme proximity neutralized many of the advantages held by close combat specialists like Space Marines, who suddenly found themselves facing devastating firepower before they could close the final distance. The psychological impact proved equally significant. Enemies accustomed to Tau avoiding close engagement were frequently destabilized by the unexpected aggression, creating additional tactical opportunities for supporting elements. Earth caste engineers within the enclaves continuously refined the equipment supporting this tactical approach. Standard issue crisis suits received reinforced frontal armor, improved stabilization systems for firing on the move, and enhanced shield generators capable of momentary overcharge to absorb the initial enemy response. Weapon loadouts evolved to emphasize burst cannons, fusion blasters, and flamers, all systems optimized for close-range effectiveness rather than the longer-range plasma rifles and missile pods favored by Empire forces. Perhaps the most controversial adaptation came with the development of limited close combat capabilities for crisis suits. While nothing approaching the specialized melee weapons of Imperial battle suits, Enclave crisis teams carried emergency combat blades, energized cutting tools that could sever hydraulic lines or damage exposed components when conventional weapons were impractical. These were weapons of last resort rather than primary combat tools, but their very existence represented a significant departure from traditional Tau combat philosophy. The Montka approach extended beyond individual engagements to shape Enclave operational planning, where Empire commanders typically deployed forces in balanced formations designed for flexible response to various threats. Farsight organized his military around specialized strike elements prepared for immediate, decisive action when opportunities presented themselves. Scout teams operated with unprecedented autonomy, authorized to call in crisis drops directly when they identified suitable targets rather than relaying information through command hierarchies. This operational philosophy required substantial cultural adjustments within the Fire caste. Traditional Tau military structure emphasized collective action coordinated through clear command chains, with individual initiative subordinated to overall strategic objectives. Farsight's approach demanded greater individual decision-making capacity at all levels, with even junior team leaders expected to identify and exploit tactical opportunities without waiting for explicit authorization. To support this cultural shift, Farsight established specialized training facilities throughout the enclaves. The most renowned, the Montka Academy on Viorlos, subjected fire warriors to intensive combat simulations designed to develop both tactical intuition and decisive action under pressure. Students faced deliberately ambiguous scenarios with multiple potential solutions, forcing them to make rapid assessments and commit to action without perfect information, conditions that precisely mirrored the realities of actual combat operations. The Academy's training methodology emphasized what Farsight termed tactical mindfulness, the ability to maintain simultaneous awareness of immediate engagement conditions and broader strategic context. Students learned to identify the critical moment when action would produce maximum effect, neither hesitating until opportunities passed nor acting prematurely before conditions were optimal. This balance between patience and decisiveness represented the philosophical core of Farsight's Montka approach, transcending simple aggression to become a sophisticated decision-making framework. Beyond military applications, the Montka philosophy gradually permeated civilian governance throughout the enclaves. Administrative systems emphasized identifying critical intervention points where minimal resources could produce maximum societal benefit. Rather than the comprehensive social engineering favored by ethereal authorities in the Empire, enclave governance focused on creating conditions where natural social development could proceed with occasional precise guidance rather than constant oversight. This approach manifested in education systems that emphasized critical thinking and decision-making skills over rote memorization of approved knowledge. Young Tau were encouraged to identify problems independently and develop solutions based on available resources rather than waiting for authority figures to provide direction. While still emphasizing collective welfare over individual advancement, this approach produced citizens with greater adaptability and initiative than their Empire counterparts. Economic organization similarly reflected Montka principles. Rather than the centrally planned production systems of the Empire, the enclaves developed a modified approach that combined strategic resource allocation for critical technologies with decentralized decision-making for implementation details. Earth caste manufacturing collectives received broad objectives with performance metrics, but maintained significant autonomy regarding production methods and innovation pathways. The philosophical implications of Montka extended to the Enclave's approach to interspecies relations, where empire diplomacy emphasized gradual cultural assimilation through persistent ideological pressure. Farsight's approach identified critical diplomatic intervention points where specific actions could achieve maximum effect with minimal cultural disruption. Human settlements within Enclave territory experienced this as targeted technological assistance, addressing their most pressing needs, rather than comprehensive, civilizing programs aimed at total cultural transformation. This pragmatic approach proved particularly effective with the Kroot mercenaries, who occasionally operated within Enclave territory. Rather than attempting to modify Kroot cultural practices to align with Tau sensibilities, an approach that frequently created tension within Empire territories, Farsight focused on establishing clear operational parameters while respecting Kroot autonomy in all other matters. The resulting relationships, while sometimes uncomfortable for Tau accustomed to greater cultural homogeneity, proved more stable and mutually beneficial than the partial assimilation attempted by Empire water caste diplomats. The most profound expression of Montka philosophy emerged in Farsight's personal combat doctrine. His integration of the Dawn Blade into Crisis suit operations represented an unprecedented synthesis of ancient weapon and modern technology, creating a combat approach unique in the galaxy. Unlike the straightforward application of force typical of most battlesuit commanders, Farsight's engagements resembled complex martial arts performances, with each movement precisely calculated to create cascading effects across the battlefield. A typical Farsight engagement began with comprehensive sensor analysis to identify not just enemy positions, but energy signatures, command and control patterns, and psychological stress indicators. This information allowed him to identify the precise intervention point where his presence would create maximum disruption. Rather than engaging the strongest enemy elements directly, he would target nexus points where his actions would trigger secondary and tertiary effects throughout the enemy formation. The Dawn Blade itself became an extension of this philosophy. Its supernatural properties, particularly its ability to sever not just physical materials but energy fields and even warp manifestations, made it the ultimate Montka implementation tool. A single precisely placed strike could disable force fields, sever psychic connections, or disrupt power distribution networks, creating vulnerabilities that conventional weapons could then exploit. The blade's life-stealing properties, while morally troubling, reinforce the Montka principle that properly applied force creates effects far beyond its immediate physical impact. Farsight's command style similarly reflected Montka principles. Rather than micromanaging subordinate commanders, he focused on identifying critical decision points where his personal intervention would produce maximum effect. The remainder of the time, he granted his officers substantial operational autonomy, trusting their judgment within clearly defined strategic parameters. This approach created a command structure that combined decisive central leadership with flexible local implementation, a balance that proved highly effective against more rigidly hierarchical opponents like Imperial forces. The Eight exemplified this command philosophy in practice. Each member maintained personal responsibility for specific operational domains, making tactical decisions independently based on their specialized expertise while coordinating through Farsight's strategic guidance. During major engagements, they would operate separately across the battlefield, each creating localized effects that combined into a coordinated overall impact greater than any single concentration of force could achieve. This distributed approach to Montka implementation proved particularly effective against enemies accustomed to facing conventional Tau tactics. Imperial commanders, expecting the traditional Tau preference for standoff engagement, frequently misinterpreted the dispersed deployment of Enclave forces as defensive weakness rather than deliberate positioning for synchronized strikes. By the time the true nature of the threat became apparent, multiple critical systems would already be compromised, forcing emergency reallocation of resources that further disrupted overall combat effectiveness. The philosophical dimensions of Montka extended to Farsight's approach to technological development. Rather than the incremental, consensus-driven innovation typical of Empire Earth caste operations, Enclave research focused on identifying critical technological gaps and concentrating resources to address them specifically. This approach produced fewer overall advancements, but generated breakthrough technologies in areas of particular strategic importance, especially defensive systems, battlesuit maneuverability, and anti-warp countermeasures. Perhaps most significantly, Farsight's Montka philosophy represented a fundamental challenge to the Empire's understanding of the greater good itself. Where ethereal interpretation emphasized patient progress toward an idealized future state through collective submission to authority, Farsight's approach focused on identifying and eliminating immediate threats to Tau welfare through decisive action. This philosophical divergence underlay the political separation between the Empire and Enclaves more fundamentally than any specific policy disagreement. For citizens of the Enclaves, Montka became more than a military doctrine. It provided a framework for understanding their society's relationship to the wider galaxy. Rather than seeing themselves as patient builders of an inevitable utopian future, they understood their role as decisive actors in an uncertain present, responsible for identifying critical moments requiring immediate action. This perspective fostered a pragmatic adaptability that distinguished Enclave culture from the more ideologically rigid society of the Empire. The Dawn Blade presents perhaps the most profound paradox of Commander Farsight's existence. This ancient artifact, discovered amid the ruins of Artha's Moloch, has extended his life far beyond the typical Tau lifespan, granting him centuries of existence, while his original companions aged and died. Earth caste scientists within the Enclaves have conducted extensive studies on the blade's life-stealing properties, confirming that each significant kill transfers a portion of the victim's remaining lifespan to the wielder. The implications of this extended life are far-reaching. Most Tau live approximately 40 standard Terran years, with even the most long-lived rarely reaching 60. Farsight, however, has now lived for over 3 centuries, witnessing multiple generations of his followers grow from infancy to old age, while he remains physically vigorous. This unnatural longevity has forced fundamental adaptations in Enclave governance structures and succession planning. Unlike the Ethereals, who maintain continuity through caste-based succession, Farsight represents a singular point of leadership continuity. His personal experience spans the entirety of Enclave history, from the initial expedition beyond the Damocles Gulf to the complex political maneuvering following the emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum. This unprecedented historical perspective gives him insights unavailable to any other Tau leader, but also creates potential vulnerability should anything happen to him. The physiological effects of the Dawn Blade extend beyond simple lifespan extension. Detailed medical examinations conducted by Earth caste researchers show subtle cellular modifications throughout Farsight's body. His neural pathways display enhanced efficiency, reaction times exceed Tau baseline by approximately 15%, and his immune system demonstrates resistance to degenerative conditions that typically affect aging Tau. These enhancements appear cumulative, with each significant combat engagement resulting in measurable physiological improvements. Perhaps most concerning are the psychological implications of such extended existence. Tau minds evolved for lifespans of approximately 4 decades, not centuries. The accumulated memories and experiences of multiple generations create cognitive patterns unprecedented in Tau neurological development. Farsight has addressed this challenge through regular meditation practices derived from ancient fire caste warrior traditions, focusing his mind on immediate tactical concerns while maintaining broader strategic awareness. The Dawn Blade's life extension properties have become central to numerous prophecies regarding Farsight's ultimate role in Tau history. Within the Empire, Ethereal scholars have developed complex interpretations, suggesting that his extended lifespan represents corruption by alien influences, a cautionary tale of power obtained outside the proper channels of the greater good. These official prophecies, carefully disseminated through water caste cultural networks, portray Farsight as a tragic figure whose initial noble intentions have been twisted by forces beyond his comprehension. The most significant of these empire prophecies emerged following the Farsight Rebellion, when senior Ethereals gathered on Tau to assess the threat posed by their renegade commander. Their divinations, recorded in the classified text known as the Unseen Warnings, predicted that Farsight's path would ultimately lead to catastrophic consequences for all Tau. According to these prophecies, his rejection of ethereal guidance would eventually remove the protective barriers they maintained against certain cosmic threats, exposing the Tau species to dangers they were not evolutionarily equipped to resist. This prophecy contains a kernel of truth that neither the Ethereals nor Farsight himself fully comprehend. The Dawn Blade's origins trace back to an ancient civilization that fell to warp corruption, its people destroyed by the very entities they sought to control. The weapon was forged specifically to combat these warp predators, its life-stealing properties designed to turn the entity's own methods against them. By wielding this blade, Farsight has inadvertently connected himself to an ancient conflict between material existence and warp predation that extends far beyond Tau understanding. Ethereal prophecies specifically claim that Farsight will ultimately destroy the Tau not through military action, but by exposing them to corruption they cannot resist. This prediction contains deliberate misdirection. The Ethereals themselves understand that certain warp entities are drawn to psychic potential, and the Tau species' minimal psychic presence has historically protected them from the worst predations of chaos. What the Ethereals obscure is their own role in maintaining this protection through methods they keep hidden even from the highest ranks of other castes. Within the Enclaves, alternative prophecies have emerged regarding Farsight's extended lifespan. Earth caste philosophers suggest that his longevity represents an evolutionary adaptation, allowing Tau leadership to develop the extended perspective necessary to navigate galactic-scale threats. These interpretations view the Dawn Blade not as corruption, but as a necessary catalyst, accelerating Tau development to match the pace of external dangers. The most compelling Enclave prophecy emerged from the research of the renegade water caste scholar Poro Kaiska, who spent decades analyzing fragmented records from Arthas Moloch alongside historical documentation of the Ethereal's first appearance. His controversial treatise, The Severed Path, suggests that Farsight's extended life serves a specific purpose: to outlive the influence of the Ethereals and reveal their true nature to the Tau species. According to Kaiska's interpretation, the Dawn Blade chose Farsight specifically because his tactical genius and philosophical independence made him uniquely capable of recognizing patterns that would remain obscured to others. By surviving long enough to witness multiple generations of ethereal leadership, Farsight would eventually identify consistencies in their behavior that revealed their true purpose, whether as benevolent guides or something more sinister. These competing prophecies reflect the fundamental philosophical division between the Empire and the Enclaves. Empire teachings emphasize collective submission to established authority as the path to advancement, while Enclave philosophy values critical analysis and independent verification. The question of which approach better serves the greater good remains unanswered, with both societies achieving remarkable technological and social development along divergent paths. Farsight's potential future role in the wider conflicts of the 41st millennium remains uncertain but significant. Unlike most Xenos leaders, whose impact remains confined to regional conflicts, Farsight's extended lifespan gives him the potential to influence events on a timescale comparable to the long-lived leaders of other major factions. While a Space Marine chapter master might serve for centuries and an Archon of the Drukhari for millennia, few combine such longevity with Farsight's strategic genius and technological resources. This potential has not gone unnoticed by Imperial prognosticators. Inquisitorial assessments of the Farsight Enclaves consistently emphasize the danger presented by a Xenos commander capable of learning from centuries of conflict with Imperial forces. Where other alien leaders might repeat historical mistakes through ignorance or cultural limitation, Farsight's adaptive tactical approach incorporates lessons from each engagement, creating increasingly sophisticated counter-responses to imperial strategies. The Ordo Xenos maintains dedicated monitoring programs focused specifically on Farsight's activities, with particular attention to his interactions with human populations in contested regions. These observations have identified a disturbing pattern. Unlike typical Tau expansion, which subordinates human cultures to Tau authority, Farsight's approach establishes mutual defense arrangements that respect human autonomy while providing technological benefits. This methodology potentially creates more stable and genuinely cooperative human-Xenos relationships than the Empire's assimilation approach, representing a more insidious challenge to imperial authority in frontier regions. More concerning to certain imperial factions is Farsight's demonstrated understanding of warp phenomena. Traditional imperial strategy regarding the Tau has relied partly on their species' limited comprehension of the immaterium and its dangers. Farsight's research into these matters, combined with practical countermeasures developed through direct experience with warp entities, potentially neutralizes this advantage. Some Ordo Malleus analysts have even suggested that Farsight's extended exposure to the Dawn Blade may eventually awaken latent psychic potential within his physiology, though no evidence currently supports this speculation. From the perspective of chaos forces operating in the Eastern Fringe, Farsight represents both opportunity and threat. His rejection of ethereal authority creates potential vulnerability to corruption through pride or ambition, traditional vectors for chaos influence. However, his first-hand experience with warp entities on Arthas Malak and subsequent development of anti-warp countermeasures demonstrates unusual resistance to such manipulation. Certain chaos warbands have specifically targeted enclave territories, seeking to eliminate this knowledgeable adversary before his understanding of their nature becomes too comprehensive. The Tyrannid hive mind appears to assign unusual priority to enclave worlds when plotting consumption vectors. Captured synaptic organisms show elevated response patterns when exposed to images or energy signatures associated with Farsight or the Dawn Blade, suggesting some level of recognition of their significance. Whether this represents tactical assessment of a dangerous adversary or some deeper recognition of the Blade's anti-warp properties remains unclear. Farsight's ultimate goals have evolved significantly since his initial break with the Ethereals. What began as a pragmatic decision to protect isolated colonies has developed into a comprehensive alternative vision for Tau society and their place in the galaxy. His extensive historical perspective, combined with knowledge forbidden within the Empire, has shaped a long-term strategy focused on ensuring Tau's survival in a universe far more dangerous than most of his species comprehend. Central to this strategy is the development of defensive technologies capable of protecting Tau physiology and psychology from warp influence. Unlike the Ethereals, who maintain ignorance of such threats among the general population while implementing hidden protections, Farsight believes that genuine security requires informed preparation at all levels of society. Enclave educational programs include basic information about immaterial dangers, while specialized defense forces receive comprehensive training in recognizing and countering warp manifestations. Farsight's approach to other species similarly reflects his extended perspective. Where the Empire views all non-Tiao through the lens of potential assimilation, Farsight recognizes fundamental incompatibilities between certain species while identifying opportunities for genuine cooperation with others. This nuanced approach has created stable relationships with human settlements and certain Kroot kindreds that would be impossible under Empire protocols, providing the Enclaves with valuable allies and resource access beyond their limited territories. The question of whether reconciliation between Farsight and the Tau Empire remains possible has no simple answer. The philosophical divide between them extends beyond political disagreement to fundamental questions about the nature of authority and the proper path toward the greater good. The Ethereals cannot acknowledge the legitimacy of Farsight's independence without undermining their own claimed monopoly on spiritual guidance, while Farsight cannot accept ethereal authority without abandoning the principles that define the Enclaves. Despite these seemingly irreconcilable differences, practical cooperation has increased as external threats to all Tau have intensified. The emergence of the cicatrix maledictum and subsequent warp phenomena throughout the galaxy has forced pragmatic collaboration against common enemies, particularly chaos forces and tyrannid splinter fleets. This operational coordination occurs primarily at the fire caste level, with Empire commanders implementing enclave tactical innovations while maintaining official distance from their source. Some Earth caste theorists within the Enclaves have proposed that this practical cooperation might eventually evolve into formal reconciliation through generational change. As younger Ethereals who have witnessed the effectiveness of Enclave methodologies rise to leadership positions within the Empire, they might gradually modify official doctrine to incorporate elements of Farsight's approach while maintaining the appearance of continuity. This convergent evolution hypothesis suggests that the fundamental pragmatism underlying Tau culture will eventually overcome ideological divisions in the face of existential threats. The most intriguing possibility for reconciliation emerges from Poro Kaiska's controversial research into ethereal origins. If his hypothesis proves correct, that the Ethereals themselves are unwitting vectors for external influence rather than conscious manipulators, then Farsight's extended lifespan might serve a specific purpose: to survive long enough to identify the true source of this influence and potentially free the Ethereals themselves from its control. Such an outcome would represent neither victory for the Empire nor the Enclaves, but a synthesis transcending both into something new. As the 42nd millennium dawns amid galaxy-wide conflict and transformation, Farsight stands at a unique crossroads in Tau history. His extended lifespan grants him perspective unavailable to any other Tau leader, while the knowledge he has accumulated presents both opportunity and danger for his species. Whether he will ultimately destroy the Tau as ethereal prophecies claim, lead them to a new understanding of their place in the universe, or fall to the countless threats arrayed against all life in the galaxy remains uncertain. What remains clear is that Farsight's legacy extends far beyond military accomplishment or political rebellion. He represents a fundamental question at the heart of Tau identity: whether their species' future lies in unified submission to established authority or critical examination of uncomfortable truths. As external pressures on the Tau increase from all directions, imperial aggression, tyrannid consumption, chaos corruption, and countless other threats, the answer to this question may determine not just which philosophy prevails, but whether the Tau survive at all in the unforgiving reality of the 41st millennium.